die.
Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace was one of the largest movie releases in human history, to the point where it transcended even being a movie and ended up becoming something of a cultural phenomenon. To most people, The Phantom Menace, love the film or hate it, was an entire multimedia and merchandising experience. Tie-in novels, t-shirts, toys, comics, music, and of course, video games. Now, there were a lot of Star Wars games being released at around the same time that The Phantom Menace was hitting the pinnacle of its marketing hype. But not all of those games were related to or even set in the same era as the film. There were a few still kind of just doing their own thing, but a solid number of them were not only directly tying into the movie, but even shared the Episode 1 subtitle to reinforce their attachment to that film's story specifically. From direct adaptations of the movie's plot like the Phantom Menace game, Jedi Power Battles, or Star Wars Obi-Wan, to more spin-off-like titles that worked in conjunction to expand the movie's narrative like Starfighter or Battle for Naboo, the spiderweb of this movie's influence was downright enormous. And some of these games remain fan favorites even to this day, with some even seeing remasters for modern platforms like Jedi Power Battles, for example. But even back in their respective times of release, this catalog boasted an impressively eclectic variety across multiple consoles, including the PS1, N64, PC, the Game Boy Color and Advance, the Dreamcast, and several more. Over the course of this channel, I've ended up playing and covering pretty much all of these Phantom Menace tie-in games, because, well, I actually love the Phantom Menace movie, and I love pretty much all of its tie-in content. As of recording this, I've even been listening to the audiobook of the Phantom Menace on Spotify, which is surprisingly good. And it's honestly been a real treat for me to go back in and play all of these old Phantom Menace games. So today, I've compiled them all here in this video, along with some extra games that I hadn't covered previously, so feel free to move around to what you haven't seen yet in the timestamps. I'm only featuring games that are either direct tie-ins with the Phantom Menace storyline or directly featured the Episode 1 moniker in the title. So for example, that means no Racer Revenge or LEGO Star Wars just because they feature Phantom Menace elements, but the Obi-Wan game and Starfighter will still be featured. But before we dive into these old beloved Star Wars games, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep. Look, we're in the age of LED lights and the attention economy, which means dopamine overdosing on short-form content mixed with blue light-heavy LED lights, and if you're like me, an entire spectrum of high-contrast colors pulsating from the inside of your gaming desktop even when the thing is off, which is where Manta Sleep comes in. High quality, adjustable, and most importantly, comfortable, the ProNap movement makers at Manta Sleep are delivering what I'd call the best sleep masks on the market right now. And there's a good chance that even minute levels of light pollution invading your sleep spaces at night could be hurting the overall quality of your sleep. But thanks to the adjustable nature of the Manta Sleep sleep masks, you can cut out that light no matter the space, making it easier for your body to sink into a deeper REM sleep cycle. These things work so well, they can even make it easy to sleep in broad daylight. And there's a plethora of different masks to suit your individual needs, ranging from weighted masks to masks with Bluetooth speakers built into them for white noise or nature sounds. So don't waste any more time not prioritizing your sleep. Use my code EvanPrince at checkout for 10% off your order by clicking on the link in the pinned comment so you can start sleeping better. Thanks again to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into it. And we're starting it off right with the fan favorite direct adaptation of the film itself, Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace.
Jedi mind tricks don't work on me. Only money.
When it comes to adapting a Hollywood movie into a video game, to say the bar is low would be a hilarious understatement. Such endeavors often ended up being little more than an obvious cash grab by big publishers who didn't recognize the medium as anything more than a technological avenue for more toy sales. That said, no film cashed in on more methods of marketing and multimedia reach than Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. A movie that saw not one, not two, but 9 different tie-in video games. Of those 9 games, however, only one of them was a direct adaptation of the film itself, a fact which the game boasts by sporting the exact same name as the movie with no extra or alternate subtitles. This particular game is simply called Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, and does its best to take the player through a playable version of nearly every sequence from the film. No, seriously, I can hardly believe how good of a job this game does at sticking to the beats from the movie. Of course, those sequences are altered significantly to suit making each scenario something playable in a video game format. But I honestly found all of the changes to be welcome, as it was fun to play through an alternative version of the events we saw in the movie. Although this was published by LucasArts, a studio called Big Ape Productions is actually credited for the development of the game itself, although I'm not sure if they handled all of the production or only parts of it. I say this because the CGI cutscenes we see throughout the game look very similar to the ones seen in other LucasArts games from that time period, like Shadows of the Empire or Masters of Terras Kasi. It was developed and released for Microsoft Windows as a PC game and released on May 18, 1999, just 2 days after the film's theatrical release. Then, roughly 4 months later, on September 14th, the game was ported to and released on the Sony PlayStation, which is the version I'll be playing and showing footage of for this video. Although I owned and played the PC version as a kid, that's the one I always see people talking about due to its graphical superiority. So I wanted to hone in on the PS1 version for this video and talk about what this port has to offer. The gameplay on offer here is a very strange hodgepodge of mix and match mechanics that make the experience a little difficult to pin down. It's an action-adventure game with platforming, dialogue interactions, sandbox exploration, and puzzle solving, all playable via a top-down camera perspective. There is very little information on this game's development, which leaves me with very little to say about what engine it's made on. What I can say is that it appears to be technologically competent. With that out of the way, let's take a look back at this video game adaptation of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
I have a bad feeling about this.
We open in the waiting room of the Trade Federation control ship, much like the film did, with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan discussing their purpose in the Naboo system with the Viceroy. Expectedly, poison gas begins to flood the chamber, but that's when something unexpected happens. We have a dialogue tree interaction with the protocol droid in this room. This matters because why did they bother to put this function in the game? The truth is, I don't care why they did it, I love it. Of course, this interaction didn't happen in the film, but it sets a clear precedent about what players are in for. This isn't just going to be a game of playing through levels and killing things the whole time. Just like the film, the doors open to let Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan burst out in spectacular fashion as they slice the battle droids to pieces. Although it's quite a bit clunkier in this version. Now, it took me quite a few levels of playing to actually get the combat down, as you'll see, so if you're wondering why I'm not deflecting these blaster bolts, it's because I didn't figure out how until Mission 5. It's actually really cool to get to see these hallways and play through this sequence to see what these areas of the ship actually looked like beyond what we were shown in the movie. This is one of the smaller levels in the game. They actually end up getting longer and more open as you play, but so far Alright, well, we can still press on. If anything, this helps us slip past our pursuers. Well, there goes our ride. The fact that we can actually witness this scene from an entirely different perspective via this game is actually so cool, and I very much appreciate this little detail. Meanwhile, we have to make our way through these
ventilation shaft.
At this point in my playing, I still had no idea how to really handle this game's combat, so I was getting slaughtered. No worries though, as I do begin to figure it out here shortly. That's right, we're going tactical commando with Obi-Wan doing Jedi side rolls while laying down a barrage of blaster fire. This is completely ridiculous, but I still cannot seem to get enough of it. Let's take this generator offline real quick. Alright, now all we need to do is find Qui-Gon and get off this ship.
Obi-Wan?
Again, we don't exactly see Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan boarding these troop transports in the movie, so getting to play through this sequence is really interesting, especially since the developers are flexing their game's capacity for moving parts via button press. For a PS1 game, this is genuinely impressive, and we haven't even seen the last of it yet. Oh, here comes trouble. Taking out these droids, we can utilize this hovercraft to sneak aboard the troop transport and make our way to the surface. I'm not even going to front. These CGI cutscenes are so utterly unnecessary for a game based on a movie that already shows the things the cutscene is trying to emulate. Even so, their aged aesthetic paired with the novelty of this little title makes their inclusion feel special in a way that the developers literally could not have foreseen. I still love them. Anyway, we're on Naboo now, specifically the planet's swamps. I actually remember playing this level as a kid. I hated it back then, but playing it now, I'm actually a little bit charmed by it. I can really see what they were going for, and since the swamp sequence in the movie is so short-lived, getting to see more of what the Naboo swamps feel like is a treat for fans like me. And the game even has swimming mechanics. I mean, this might seem menial compared to modern games, and it really doesn't play a role in this game at all beyond this level and one other one, but the fact that it's here is just very cool to me. Things like this weren't super common in PS1 games, so I'm always impressed when I see this level of environmental interactivity. There's a lot of core mechanics introduced to us in this level actually, like the... Wait, did you hear that?
Who are you?
Mr. Jar Jar Binks.
Jokes aside, Jar Jar plays a minuscule role in this game, so if you've got an issue with him, don't worry, you'll barely see him. I personally don't mind the character in general, but I'm aware some people can't stand him, though that's another topic altogether. Doesn't matter what I think of him though, because the developers clearly hate him.
Mr. Clumsy, but Mr. Still help.
Something pretty cool about this level is that it serves as a genuine vertical slice for the game. I'm pretty sure every single major gameplay mechanic you'll encounter throughout the rest of the game shows up in this one level. So you will know based on this level alone if you're about to enjoy the rest of the game or not. Every single mission that follows this are just variations of everything we do in this level. Some are more combat focused and others are more puzzle focused. This one is a great mix of everything, which is good because the next level tones it all down quite a bit.
Obi-Wan, over here. I see you've met Jar. We need to find safe haven until these droids pass by.
The Moto Grande's safe place would be Gunga. 'Tis where I grew up. 'Tis a safe city.
Can you take us there?
It's embarrassing, but I've been banished. I've forgotten the bosses would do terrible things if me going back there.
You hear that? That is the sound of 1,000 terrible things heading this way.
Your point is well seen. This way, hurry. My warning yous, Gungans no liking outlanders. Don't expect a warm welcome.
Getting into Gunga, the expected dialogue occurs of Qui-Gon reasoning with Boss Nass about getting to Theed. Except this time, we have to go rescue Jar Jar from jail as Obi-Wan, and it's interesting. Before I talk about that, I gotta take a second to applaud the game design a little bit. I know it's following the plot threads of the film, so they kinda had to do it this way, but opening on an action combat-centric level and progressing into a level that introduced more platforming and puzzle solving, which then leads to a totally puzzle-focused level, is brilliant in my opinion. After this, the game just cycles through variations of the aforementioned level types. As for Gunga, it takes what I'd say is the second highest amount of liberties for the sake of gameplay inclusion as we see in the game, the first being Coruscant.
I'm trying to sell these electro-binoculars.
Wandering around this underwater city and interacting with the Gungans makes for a unique experience that you can't really find in any other Star Wars game. I'd say this is one of the things that makes this game worth playing, actually. Just for the novelty of walking around the city and experiencing it like this. These platforms going up and down like this is, again, just showing off what they were capable of pulling off in this game at the time. It's great, I love it. For a game that insists on not letting us look up, it does have a surprising amount of verticality. As mentioned before, this game relies heavily on platforming since there's no real enemies here unless you make them, which of course I did make them by not bothering to figure out the correct way to handle getting around these guards, so I ended up just killing a bunch of them. But I'm pretty sure that's standard practice for this game, so I wasn't worried about it. I do love how we can see all of the fish moving around outside of the bubbles we're in. This is such an awesome level of love and care for a movie tie-in game. Anyway, there's Jar Jar, let's get out of here.
Must warn the Queen of the Trade Federation's attack. Beyond this bridge is the city of Theed and the Queen's palace. Follow me, Obi-Wan.
This here's big mechanics. Ouch time.
Okay, so Qui-Gon is dead. A tank just shot him. Not the bridge, that hit him directly. The first thing that happens is a tank shoots Qui-Gon and blows up the bridge with Jar Jar still on it. I don't remember that from the movie. Either way, that leads us into a platforming section, and this is the only other level in the game where the swimming mechanic will matter, but they did make great use of it. This level takes place in the Gardens of Theed, Naboo's capital city, and it's actually visually spectacular. I am aware of how much better this all looks on the PC version, of course, but there's something about these chunky PS1 graphics that really appeals to me. I guess because I grew up around these kinds of games and in the era of battle droids and whatnot, but I can't get enough of this aesthetic. We even get to navigate a maze garden while fighting droids. It's great. I do need to say that this game is actually really challenging. Like, it's mostly fair except for 2 instances, but overall, it's a pretty difficult game to play. This comes down to the controls and lack of health items throughout the levels. Most levels have a precisely placed number of health items from start to finish, with an idea of when you will need more health if you're playing competently. Some levels are more generous with these than some are less generous. I would have liked to see a bit more playtesting for these levels to dial in this placement a bit more, because there are some sections that need a few more health pickups, particularly an escort mission, which is next actually.
I am glad to see that you have survived. The Trade Federation has taken complete control of Theed. We must escort the Queen to safety.
The hangar is some distance from here. There's a passage underneath the palace. This one.
This is it, the hardest mission in the game, and arguably the worst. Its competition being the Coruscant level, which I'm getting to that. Escort missions are pretty awful, regardless of the game, and this is universally well known. But this game is especially not suited for it. Trying to protect the Queen with the control scheme we have is a terrible experience. Guess what she does when she starts taking fire? She falls to the ground and covers her head as blaster fire rips her to shreds. She doesn't run and hide or take cover or anything. She's not even the real Queen, we should just leave her here and go, to be honest. Sometimes she stops and waits for us to check if the next area is safe to proceed, but other times she just runs ahead and will not stop or run back or anything. She'll just drop to the ground and cover her head while screaming, "Help me!
Help me!"
The only thing to offset this design is the enormous amount of health she has, so she can just tank 100 blaster bolts before finally keeling over. But unfortunately, I lost a lot of that health bar near the start of this mission, so it was very stressful near the end. Because they start rolling out droideka patrols, and taking those things out without dying yourself is a serious challenge. It's so bad at times that near the end of this level actually doesn't even feel fair. As you try and fight off the droids ahead of you, the game spawns in an entire patrol right behind you, and you can't account for them because they spawn right around the corner after you cross a threshold. So you have to trigger the aggression of the droids ahead of you and then turn around immediately to go try and fight the freshly spawned group behind you, which includes a droideka. This is actually the most combat heavy level in the game, and it's for the worst because it's painful to try and play. This is one of only 2 places I soft locked myself from progressing due to the Queen's health being so low and just turned on invincibility to beat the level. Finally, with that out of the way, we're able to board the Queen's shuttle and head to the next level, which left me in a deeply conflicted state. It's pretty well known on this channel how little I appreciate the frequent usage of the planet Tatooine in the Star Wars universe. I understand how much it probably eases development time to make assets for a barren desert world, and I also recognize the significance of the world to the films. That said, I usually get frustrated when other media in the universe opts to go to Tatooine because it's supposed to be a backwater nothing planet whose only notable trait is being the planet that Jabba the Hutt operates from.
The Hutts are gangsters.
So the fact that arguably the best 3 missions of this game all take place on Tatooine was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. For the next 3 levels, we are given control of Qui-Gon as we wander through the streets of Mos Espa trying to get our hands on a T-14 hyperdrive generator, a part that no one in town seems to have except for our favorite Troidarian, Watto. When I say that's what we're doing, I mean we are literally just walking around doing side quests to help the residents of the town and trade parts. So why did I say these levels are the best of the game? Well, I don't really know if I can explain it, but I just felt like there's something so satisfying about getting to walk around and interact with people and do side quests as a Jedi in a more sandbox RPG setting like this. The first thing that happens is the game lets us fight off some Tusken raiders between us and the town. These things are really aggressive and want us dead, and probably also to assault us and enslave us, and maybe, depending on the tribe, even eat us through a straw.
I hate them!
So I slaughtered them like animals. Finally getting into the city of Mos Espa, we see a host of friendly NPCs to interact with, and the way they were able to make this little city feel so lived in on a PS1 game is so cool to me. I took it for granted back then, but I've played PS2 games that couldn't manage to make a city feel lived in like this. There's no shortage of exotic aliens to see and interact with, including Team-Toe Pagales, for some reason. He's a reoccurring character in this game with multiple lines of interactable dialogue, and none of the other racers are, yet Team-Toe shows up multiple times. Unfortunately, Rats Tyrell does not appear. Want me to make that death scene way worse? That's a real deleted scene, by the way. He actually says goodbye to his wife and several newborn children before the race, and then dies shortly thereafter. No wonder they cut it. Anyway, this level will have quite a bit of aimless walking, trying to get your bearings on where you even are, and no shortage of thugs trying to sprint up to you and shove you, following it with a threat. They never actually deliver on these threats, and you can typically avoid taking damage by simply backing up after they initiate their shove animation. Then, when we eventually find Anakin, he makes us chase him through a death trap junkyard, complete with whatever the hell that thing is. Looks like it crushes garbage or something, but right now it's trying to crush us. And then a bunch of local Jawas try to murder us for reasons unknown to me, so I
slaughtered them like animals.
And here I thought Jawas were typically pretty friendly. The rest of this level is made up of handling little side quests and finding people who will trade parts that we can find for parts Anakin needs in order to repair his pod racer. Which, actually, there's a couple of different ways to accomplish this. You don't have to rely on a single method of who to trade with. Depending on what you do and for who, you'll get a variety of different parts that you can trade with various NPCs across the town. Also, we have to fight and kill this thing. What is this thing, you ask? Well, I don't know. I tried to find information on what it is, but no one seemed to know, and guides always simply referred to it as a beast or monster. Before you suggest it, no, this can't be a cliff wampa. In my retrospective on Shadows of the Empire, I noted the fact that it was very odd to find wampas on a desert planet when we really only saw them on Hoth in the films. As it turns out, this was accounted for, and I simply didn't do enough research because game director John Knowles explained why it's there. He's quoted as saying, quote, "The cliff wampa is actually the result of Imperial bioengineering. The Empire was so impressed by this powerful creature, who you'll remember did maul several of their vaunted stormtroopers on Hoth, that they managed to capture some and adapt them to various environments to be used almost like a vicious guard dog," end quote. This means that it's not native to the planet Gaul where we saw it in Shadows of the Empire, and this can't be one because the Empire doesn't even exist yet. So, what is this thing? Most of the wildlife on Tatooine tend to be scaly and reptilian, so since this isn't a cage like this, it might not be, and actually probably isn't from Tatooine. So I'm accepting theories as to the identity of this creature in the comments. Go crazy, lore nerds. With the parts for Anakin's pod racer on hand, we're ready to make our way to the Mos Espa arena where we can prepare for the big race. Alright, so we've reached the arena, and Darth Maul can be spotted watching us from afar menacingly before we get started here. This is a shorter mission, but a lot happens here. Before we can go meet the others to watch the race, Qui-Gon has to go strike a deal with Jabba the Hutt to borrow the money for the bet he's making with Watto. Which isn't accurate to the film at all, since Qui-Gon didn't bet any money on the race. He just wagered his ship against Anakin's freedom and the hyperdrive generator. This is pretty out of character anyway, as I don't think Qui-Gon would have been trying to borrow money from a Hutt if he could help it. Actually, he was the loose cannon Jedi, so I don't know, maybe. Either way, Jabba immediately tries to kill us by dropping us into an arena and making us fight for his entertainment. As for what it is we're fighting, again, I'm not sure. The guides just refer to him as Jabba's champion, but I'm not sure what this thing is supposed to be. He's too big to be a Gamorrean, and this game is actually notorious for the absence of Gamorreans anyway. Well, we kill the thing and head out into the cantina where we find Team-Toe having a drink. From here, we have to find Watto to make our bet, but before we can get to him, we have to buy this guy and his Ithorian friend a jury juice. Then we link up with Watto, place our bet, and head out to see Anakin before the race. All is well until this little creature comes running up and takes Anakin's ignition capacitor. He's gonna need that thing, so we have to chase it down as it runs us through a host of Tusken Raiders trying to kill us before finally leading us straight into a trap.
You're looking for Anakin's ignition capacity. Well, you'll have to go through me if you want it.
Man, I don't remember this from the film. Who's this scary-looking monster? Well, Qui-Gon makes him one with the Force, and we get Anakin's ignition capacitor back from him. Right away, it's clear this was all being set up by Watto to try to keep him from winning the race. Not this time, though, because we straight up just kill this dude. And with that done, all we have to do is sit back and watch Anakin win the race. After Anakin wins, seemingly the entire town lines up to wave goodbye and see us off. I mean, look at all these people. Oh well, we've got places to be, so we head into the desert back to the Queen's ship. And on the way, we get ambushed by a bunch of these DRK-1 Dark Eye probe droids. I manage to fight them off and get back on track when suddenly, Darth Maul literally jumps down and starts flailing his blade at us wildly. This is our first example of blade combat, and it's insane. I do survive, but barely, because trying to play this game's melee combat is very unpredictable. Thankfully, there's a med kit here for us to heal up before finishing our battle and jumping aboard the Queen's ship as it leaves. Ah, Coruscant. The whole planet is one big city. Fans of the channel are well aware by now that I love when the Star Wars universe takes us to Coruscant. There's so much potential here, especially in a game like this that gives us so much sandbox potential. Oh man, I'll bet it'll be something cool like exploring the Jedi Temple as Anakin or Obi-Wan, getting to see more of where they train, and
Obi-Wan and I must present Anakin to the Jedi Council.
Very well. Captain Panaka and I will be quite safe, I'm sure. It's only a short air taxi ride to the Senate. Thank you for your help. May the Force be with you.
Take care, Your Highness. May the Force be with you.
We must reach Senator Palpatine's chambers as soon as possible.
Come along, Anakin. Your destiny awaits.
Did my game glitch? Or nope, I'm playing as Panaka. What is this? I know for a fact none of this happened in the film. They were literally met by Palpatine upon arrival. Not to mention, how are we nearing the end of the game and only just now leaving the perspective of one of the Jedi? This is the only mission where we play as Panaka, which is cool as an idea. I like Panaka as a character and would be open to seeing more of his character, but it feels so out of nowhere here. Not to mention this mission is really bad. They managed to take one of the most interesting planets in the universe and make the worst mission of the game on it. We get to do some thrilling things like trying to sell our electro-binoculars.
Hello, friend. Can I help you?
I'm trying to sell these electro-binoculars.
They appear to be in good order. They aren't stolen, are they?
No, I am the legal owner of these electro-binoculars, I assure you.
Well, in that case, I'm willing to offer 100 Republic credits for the pair. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, thank you. I hope you enjoy these.
Or moving crates around.
We have to get out of here.
Lots of moving crates around, actually. Like, this one puzzle requires so much crate moving and wastes so much time for no reason other than to pad the mission length of an otherwise very short mission. When we're not doing that, we're fighting off hordes of thugs attempting to kill us. At least this little cantina sequence looks pretty cool, and we get these really neat little aliens to talk to. Lastly, we end up going through these sewer areas where a bunch of homeless people are holed up underneath the Senate chambers, which is admittedly a really neat little detail to show in this level, but after that, it's done. It's a really short mission, honestly, and a big waste of potential where we could have played as Obi-Wan in the Jedi Temple doing some side quest stuff with Anakin or something. Really, just imagine how cool this game would be if we got to actually walk around some parts of the temple and interact with a Jedi or two. Maybe they weren't allowed to go that route or thought the game needed more combat, but I think this was the wrong move, personally. I do need to give the game props for managing to make its most enjoyable missions on Tatooine and its worst mission on Coruscant.
Good job.
There's only 2 levels left, and they combine to adapt the epic climax of the film in what I'd call a spectacular but heavily flawed fashion. We start as Obi-Wan, entering the hangar when Darth Maul makes his iconic appearance, forcing the 2 Jedi to don their sabers and prepare to engage in combat. Just before this happens, however, the game cuts to a different perspective, giving us control of Padme Amidala leading the assault to reclaim her palace. I am actually okay with this, as her role in retaking the palace was critical to the film, but seemed to have a little less screen time than the Anakin space battle or Gungan battlefield scenes. So letting fans get to see a little more of that sequence is not only interesting, but a great choice for this game in my opinion. This level also reuses the same map from the 5th mission, so it made for a great use of resource management on the developer's part. Also, playing this level as Padme is easier than it was as Obi-Wan because we don't have to escort a defenseless character the whole time. Panaka is with us, but he's armed and seems to have plenty enough health, so it was never really an issue. Although I will say that if you haven't kind of mastered this game's controls by this point, you are going to struggle to get through this mission because I had to have a heavy reliance on when to hit the dodge button, when to use which weapon, and when to just try and shoot enemies before they noticed me. Also, you need to be saving regularly. I was saving every 2 or so minutes and across multiple slots. After you make it to a certain point in the map, the game switches your perspective back over to Obi-Wan as you and Qui-Gon try to take on Darth Maul. And despite the game's very finicky and inconsistent saber combat, it's hard to mess up such a cool set piece. I mean, come on, this is one of the coolest sequences in movie history, do not at me. The fight doesn't go on for very long though until the perspective shifts back over to Padme again as we continue the reclamation of Theed Palace. This shifting back and forth will be a constant for the rest of the game, by the way, as that's how they opted to adapt the finale. The rest of Padme's scene for this mission is just pushing your way to the palace for the infiltration. For the duel, however, the game is not only determined to show you every scene from the film, but to add in a host of other scenes that for sure did not happen. I'll get to that. We're on the last mission now, and this mission alone took me a little over an hour to beat. It is quite long, and a lot of that is due to the large amount of puzzle solving demanded of the player on both Padme and Obi-Wan's sections. We start with Padme, however, as we need to attain a red key card and free a host of trapped Naboo security guards. To make things worse, the front door is not an immediately apparent option. We can actually avoid this situation by pushing this crate over and activating a hidden passage that lets us access the room they're being kept in so we can grab the red keycard we need. And after that, it's back to the Darth Maul fight. I think my biggest issue here is that they scattered a handful of battle droids on these balconies, feasibly as a means of spicing up the gameplay, but I kind of felt like it ruined the tension of the sequence. I mean, this is a significantly impressive level they've designed, and it's got a serious ambient atmosphere to it. Just listen to the droning background noise. The only sound is the blades clashing in the distance, and it gets ruined every time we hear a blaster shot go off, which isn't the end of the world, and I can appreciate them trying to ensure players got as much content as they could stuff into the game. That said, sometimes less is more. Going back to Padme, we get a long hallway sequence that really just ends up being just keeping our distance and spamming repeater rounds in the general direction of anything that resembles a droid. Which then leads us to another crate puzzle and into the main hall. Back to Obi-Wan again, and this section is where the game really doubles down on the platforming elements. I was pretty good at platforming in this game, and even I was struggling to make it work in this section. After this, we get our last real puzzle of the game, where we need to move a crate to access the control room for these energy conduits. Moving the conduits around does allow us access to the next section, where we can finally catch up with Qui-Gon. But not before the game swaps perspectives back to Amidala again as we tackle one final wave of battle droids before breaking into the throne room and confronting the Viceroy. Then we're back to Obi-Wan again for the final time, finally catching up to Qui-Gon and... well, I mean, you know how this plays out.
Die, Jedi, die.
I'm gonna be real with you. I was so low on health at this point in the game, and the level does not offer any health pickups that I could find before this confrontation, and I really didn't want to replay this whole level again, so I just cheated my way to infinite health so I could get this over with. But I mean, it was a climactic duel. And there you have it, Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace for the Sony PlayStation. Man, I remember really loving this game as a kid, but I don't think I ever beat it until doing so for this video. I remember getting to Tatooine several times, and I can at least remember getting to Coruscant, and maybe the last battle, but I don't remember ever actually beating it. I had the PC copy back then, and as far as I could tell, the two games are nearly identical experiences, though the PC version obviously looks better. It's a really weird little game, and I'm not sure I've ever played anything like it before. The combat isn't great, and the sandbox aspects, although fun, are more what I'd call half-baked. The game doesn't really do anything super well, but it does so many things interestingly enough to make the game feel like an overall rewarding time. I enjoyed playing it even now for the most part. There were a few minor annoyances here and there, but overall, I think it makes a great little companion piece to the film it's adapting. And now that it's readily available on modern consoles like the PS4 and 5, it's easier than ever for you to get your hands on it and try it out for yourself. If anything you saw was interesting and you want to sink into some prequel-era Star Wars content, then, I mean, you could really do worse than this one. And I seriously mean that. You really could do worse than this one. Although I've had plenty of positive things to say about the game here, it was not received quite as well on release. Looking back now shows an aggregate score of 54% for the PS1 release and a moderately more generous score of 62% for the PC one, which just about sums up the overall reception to the game in general. The PC port was reviewed on the lower end of favorable, while the PS1 version got treated just a bit harsher. I will say that a lot of the negative comments I saw were mentioning the game Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 as a comparison, stating that this title paled in comparison to that one, which, as a well-known fan of that game, feels a bit odd. Their releases were years apart and their gameplay is totally different. The only commonality here is the Star Wars moniker. Regardless of that though, critics were using the Phantom Menace's failure to match up to what Dark Forces 2 had accomplished as a point of criticism, so take that how you will, I guess. As for me, I still think that The Phantom Menace is a great time, offering up a unique take on the events of the film that's made for fans of the series to jump in and enjoy. From the janky combat to the simple puzzle solving, it's pretty clear there's nothing groundbreaking about this game. It's just a Star Wars game letting you play through the events of the movie it was made for. That's all it wanted to be, that's all it advertised itself as, and that's more than enough for me. Jedi Power Battles is an action hack-and-slash game released for the Dreamcast and Sony PlayStation on April 4th in the year 2000. It was developed as a tie-in title for The Phantom Menace by LucasArts, but also received a Game Boy Advanced version developed by HotGen Studios Ltd. That's very different. An often forgotten about Star Wars title, Jedi Power Battles is actually a little bit redundant. Although it serves as a tie-in game, its plot is more like a retelling of the film, which was already handled just fine by the actual Phantom Menace game adaptation. Not only that, but the real adaptation did it way better than this one and had a lot more to offer. That said, there are some unique aspects to this game that you can't really get anywhere else, specifically the ability to play cooperatively with a friend as you run through the levels. What you're seeing here is the PS1 version of the game, and it does look great for what it is. Although this game was released for the PS1 a few months before the PS2 found its way to store shelves in the US, so I think it's fair to say the game was dated even for its own time considering what's on offer here. Not only does it have very little to offer narratively, the game itself is a bit limited in its offerings, with only 10 main levels across the duration of its playtime, and a few hidden unlockable ones that most people probably never saw. But that isn't to suggest the game is short. Oh no, it's lengthy, but this is due entirely to the intensity of its difficulty. This game can be pretty damn hard, but only sometimes, strangely enough. Some of these levels took me upwards of an hour and a half to beat, while others seem to go by a little faster. A lot of this is due to the lives mechanic. Like many older games from this time period, Jedi Power Battles operates on a lives mechanic that slots the player a limited amount of respawns before having to simply restart the level you're playing out right now. Now, I feel grateful that it wasn't a lives before restarting the whole game, because I'm not sure I would have bothered pushing through it if that were the case. Each level starts you with 5 lives unless you're progressing to said level straight from the previous level, in which case your lives actually carry over. In this case, playing earlier missions and pushing them into the next can be advantageous to gather additional lives for when the game's difficulty increases later on. You gain new lives by gathering up as many Republic credits as you can find across each level, which feeds into your high score anyway. As you play through each level, you're really trying to reach one of various checkpoints. Upon reaching these checkpoints, if you die, you will be sent back to this location instead of restarting the level, but only so long as you have extra lives readily available. When those run out, it's level reset. In some ways, it actually kind of feels a bit like a Souls game given how challenging the later levels are, and the sensation of pushing from checkpoint to checkpoint kind of feels like chasing bonfires. And not just that, but every level ends on a boss battle that requires the player to learn its movement patterns in order to beat it, some much harder than others. And Souls players looking for a good challenge would probably have a really great time with this game too, because while it's really hard, it doesn't feel unfair or janky, just very challenging. So I can't even be mad at the difficulty here, because most of the times I died, I could kind of tell that I just needed to master the mechanics a bit more than I had at that time. Clearly, LucasArts thought people were going to be able to beat the game, however, as they designed it with the intention of multiple playthroughs baked in. I started playing assuming that once I unlocked a level while playing as a character, it unlocked for all of them. This is not the case. You are expected to beat the game with each of the available characters in order to level them all up. And not only that, but certain unlockables are hidden behind completion with each character, which obviously lends itself to the idea that this game was designed to be played co-op, but I'll get to that. So yeah, they clearly thought people were going to be beating this game more than once, which after playing it for a while myself, I sincerely doubt very many people did. I mean, I'm sure some who owned the game managed to play through it once, or maybe even twice, but a lot more people probably played a few levels and then dropped it for something else. One of the most impressive aspects about Jedi Power Battles is the multitude of characters we can play as, and the fact that each one of them controls completely differently. Now, when I first booted up the game, I went straight to Qui-Gon and played a bit of the first level with him just to test out the game. For my first real playthrough attempt, however, I selected Obi-Wan, just because I figured it'd be more accurate. Obi-Wan has a more aggressive playstyle than some of the other characters, with his main force move being a forward leaping slash that I found to be useful enough. He's also equipped with some type of grenade that we can collect and throw at enemies, mainly useful against bigger foes or just to get yourself out of a bad situation if you get surrounded. Playing as Obi-Wan was a pretty fun time, but had I realized in advance that he was not the optimal character to go with for this game, I would not have chosen him for my primary playthrough. You know who I would have chosen? Mace Windu. He's unironically the best base character of the available selection, and that even holds up canonically as he was a lightsaber specialist who created his own specialized stance for saber combat influenced from the dangerous life of his homeworld. His moves are faster and easier to combo, and his special force move is not only way more useful, but it looks way cooler than the other characters too. If you're planning on trying this game out, then I really recommend starting with him, as the other characters are harder to play with. If you're wondering why his lightsaber is blue here instead of purple, then your instinct may be to just assume that since this game was released 2 years before Attack of the Clones, the developers simply weren't aware that his lightsaber was supposed to be purple yet. And yeah, that is probably true, but there is also a canonical reason here too. The saber we see Windu using in the second and third film isn't his only lightsaber. There are canonical references to Mace having possession of and using a blue-bladed lightsaber before and during the events of the Phantom Menace. This is further supported by the fact that the saber hilt we see on Windu's person in the first film is totally different from the one we see him wielding in episodes 2 and 3. There was even a toy sold of him from this time showing he had a blue lightsaber. This is not unlike the character of Plo Koon, who has been depicted with both a blue and orange blade at times, suggesting that he too owns more than one saber. This would not be surprising given their status as Jedi Masters. Also, Plo Koon is really not a great character to play with. Maybe someone else could do a better job with him than I did, but I hated his playstyle and didn't get far at all with him before moving on to a different character. I didn't like his force field ability, and his little shield thing in place of a grenade wasn't a great choice, to be honest. It wasn't even really effective. I don't have all that much to say about Plo Koon beyond the fact that as opposed to Mace being the best character to use, Plo Koon might be the worst. At least so far as they control. Next up, I played as Qui-Gon for a few missions, and, well, he's not bad. He's a little clunkier than Obi-Wan or Mace, but he's easier to use than Plo Koon. His force ability isn't bad either, as he does a kind of force wave thing. The fact that he's arguably the coolest looking Jedi of the bunch made me kinda wish he was more fun to play with, since I love the green lightsaber color. And of course, we need to talk about Darth Adigalia. I just refuse to believe that the developers didn't realize by this point that red lightsabers are for the bad guys. You can't just give a Jedi a red lightsaber. I can understand them not wanting to have 3 blue-colored sabers here, but you cannot just give her a red lightsaber and call it a day. Of course, there's a Wikipedia article confirming that she did at some point have a red lightsaber before the Naboo invasion, but I mean, I'm pretty sure this article is just trying to canonize this appearance for some reason. But yes, she also has 2 lightsabers, the second of which was the blue one we see her with in literally all of her other media portrayals. Alright, fine, we'll say she had a red kyber crystal for some reason in her first blade. Moving on to her gameplay, she's kind of the hardest to master in my opinion, but she is a pretty powerful character. She has a shield that destroys enemies who get pushed into it and deflects blaster shots, which is super useful if you can get it mastered. Also this mind trick ability which stuns enemies, but I didn't find it super useful while playing as her. Ki-Adi-Mundi was actually an unlockable playable character in the Dreamcast version of this game, but did not appear in the PS1 version we are covering today. An interesting absence is Yoda, as the team was prohibited from depicting Yoda in this game because Lucas had not yet released Attack of the Clones, which showed Yoda's first fight scene. He does make a voice appearance, however, by narrating the ending cutscene and offering his iconic laugh every time the player picks up an item. After selecting one of these available playable characters, we can get into the meat of the game, which takes place across 10 levels that act as a loose adaptation of the events seen in the film. These 10 levels are as follows. The Trade Federation battleship. So this one is obvious. It starts where the movie does, with the Jedi you've selected running out of the room with poison gas. Everything after that, however, is a series of made-up nonsense, including a bunch of platforming, a boss battle against a massive worker droid, and another boss battle against a droid starfighter. I had to play this mission at least 10 times across the course of my footage acquisition for this game. If I never see this level again, I'll be more than happy. Oh yeah, and we can't forget the conveyor belts, because it's a Star Wars game and that means a conveyor belt scene is absolutely necessary.
Not again.
The second level is a lot more straightforward. We're in the Naboo swamps, where we have to take on more battle droids as we make our way to the end of the level and have a boss battle with a giant slug. Okay, I guess that's on Naboo somewhere. Level 3 puts us into the city of Theed on the 3rd hardest level of the game. Seriously, this one took me an hour and a half and multiple attempts to get through it. It is insanely difficult, but we do get to drive an AAT battle tank, which is awesome. I loved this bit. Saving all of these handmaidens is an insane task, however, as one in particular is guarded by an offensive amount of rocket droids. The Theed Royal Palace isn't much better, but I will say it's not as hard as the last mission. I was able to get through this one a little bit easier, but it did have an obnoxious amount of platforming bits. The environment design is good here though. I appreciate the amount of work that went into making all of these levels look so unique and varied. Not to mention that the end-level bosses are far more forgiving than anything else we see before or after them. Okay, pretty good so far. What's next? The game has been stupidly hard so far, but this level is where the whole situation takes a sharp turn for the worse. This was the level that made me just give up and start save scumming to get through this thing. Unlike previous levels where you can deflect droid blaster fire back at them, the Tusken Raiders fire solid projectiles, which just evaporate into the lightsaber blade. You have to escort Anakin, but fortunately, he doesn't make himself too much of a nuisance. No, the main issue here is the fact that you're expected to platform while dodging bullets and blaster fire from multiple enemies at once, and if you die one too many times, it's game over. So yeah, I started abusing my emulator's save state functionality to save scum in order to get through this slog, and don't worry, it gets worse. Once we power battle our way up the side of this hill, hoping for the sweet release of the end level, we're put face to face with this monstrosity. I don't know what it is, I don't know how to beat it, and I tried many times to do it the right way until I was driven to the point of enabling cheats just to get past it. I'm still not sure how to beat it. I don't think overcoming it the fair way was even within my capability. It moves too much and doesn't give you any room to strike it. Even with invincibility on, I still couldn't see the pattern needed to beat it without taking damage, and you basically can't take damage, because this isn't even the final boss of this level. No, that would be Darth Maul, who shows up in a minute after we trudge through another 5 minutes of Tusken Raiders to really test our health and lives. Again, this boss is just not fair. You can barely even move without taking a hit. You can't block his attacks because he can wail on you until your block gets broken, and he has an infinite block. No, really, I actually tested that later. His block cannot actually be broken. You have to time everything so precisely and continuously vary your attack patterns to even land a hit on him. So it's a good thing we'll have a whole level dedicated to fighting him later. And however difficult I'm making this sound, it's not enough to emphasize the actual difficulty. So believe me when I tell you that the next level just leaves the realm of reasonable. Technically, this level is split into 2 parts, and is actually 2 different levels, but your lives carry over between both parts, so if you die at the end of the second part and lost all your lives, it's game over. Back to the start of the first part. This is the hardest level of the game. Even the levels that follow this one aren't as hard as this one. It's not even like challenging, it's just grossly unfair. So of course I had to go watch a speedrunner make the whole thing look easy like he was barely trying. Well, what else is new? Either way, I'm not bad at games like this. I know this is just really hard because that's the only thing this game is even known for, its difficulty. Most of the people who have ever owned it probably haven't even seen the later levels, including this one. There are upwards of a dozen of these thugs on screen at once, all shooting at us endlessly and making it very hard to platform. Although trying to just run past them is the only reasonable way to get through it, because if you tried to fight them all, you'd either run out of health and lives or die of old age before seeing the end of the mission, because it takes forever to try to do it that way. I'll give the designers props for integrating these moving cars as part of the platforming in the level though. I do think that's a cool idea, and they did interesting things with it. Also, they gave this one specific boss his own theme song, and it's super short-lived.
We've been waiting for you.
That was it. No idea why they did this, but that is really in the game. I didn't edit that in. After putting him down, we move on to the next level, the Naboo Ruins. This one is actually a breath of fresh air. It's genuinely easier than the last level and feels fair. It's still really challenging, and I was still safe scumming to get through it, but I was back to playing without cheats and didn't end up dying often or in any way that felt gratuitous like the last level. And for some reason, we have to fight a bunch of Gungans. Shouldn't they be on our side? I don't get it. A big Gungan is the end-level boss too. It's bizarre, and also he's really annoying to fight. As if to give us another moment of brief reprieve, this mission is the first time since the second level that I caught myself actually having fun. It's also the only time we see a cutscene across the whole game except the ending. And since they animated it with every major playable character in the game, technically that's 5 different cutscenes, although they all play out exactly the same, only swapping out the character we see in the scene itself. The mission has us flying through the streets of Theed on a stap, which is admittedly really fun. It still took me 2 attempts to get through, but having some variety after all of those previous missions made this feel so much better than it probably would have otherwise. Hell, I think I'd almost rather more of the game had been like this than the other levels, because at least this is enjoyable. Although this is the only level we see like this. Moving on to our penultimate level, we're tasked with scaling up these cliffs outside of the city to find the palace again. This level is only 5 minutes long by necessity because you're on a 5-minute timer to clear the level and rescue 5 Naboo pilots before that timer runs out. If it does, then it's game over. Again, this level is challenging, but does not feel nearly as impossible as Tatooine or Coruscant did. No idea what's up with that either. The 2 hardest levels of the game are back to back and placed dead center in the progression. One thing I'll say about this level is that it's one of the better looking ones in the game. The waterfalls and gorgeous Nabooian architecture are very pleasant to look at even in these graphics. Once the pilots are saved, we're on to the final mission of the game. Aptly titled, The Final Battle, we're back to the insane difficulty again due exclusively to how impossible Maul is to fight. I even went and watched a speedrunner try it again, and even he was getting aggroed by Maul as he tried to glitch his way out of the battles whenever possible. Most of the level is just facing Maul until you wear him down enough to retreat back, and then you chase him. But the middle section does have some platforming bits against some battle droids, and then we need to disable these fan blades and fall down this tunnel into a puzzle. This game doesn't really have puzzles, like at all. This inclusion is very perplexing, but I had to do it so many times with each character that I ended up having it totally memorized by the time I was done with this game. Then we face off against Maul, again, and finally put him down. Run the ending cutscene. Awesome, cool, we did it. But wait. Alright, I guess this must be an alternate reality where Mace, Plo Koon, and Adi Gallia took the situation more seriously and came to Naboo, resulting in Qui-Gon surviving. Now that we've beaten the game with Obi-Wan, we've actually unlocked 2 extra characters to play with, Padme and Captain Panaka. They control the same as one another, but with a few varying abilities, although beating the first mission with them is nearly impossible because they won't auto-aim at the droid Starfighter, and we can't lock onto it manually. This game feels unfinished. Due to the lack of lightsabers, we mainly end up spamming blaster shots when playing as these characters, but their inclusion is a fun novelty, one that most people who owned this game probably never saw. Speaking of inclusions most people probably missed because this game was too hard for them to beat as kids, if you beat it with Qui-Gon, you unlock Darth Maul as a playable character, and he's easily the strongest of the unlockable characters. Fun to play as too, I mean he has a lightning attack. Then, if you beat the game with Mace Windu, you'll unlock access to a hidden survival mode that lets you work to fend off 100 enemies without dying. This mode sucks, but it was an excuse to play with Darth Maul for a while. Beating the game with Adi Gallia also unlocks a hidden bonus mode called Kadu Race. It sucks. You mash a button to race one Kadu against another, and then you win. Can't believe this was even included. It sucks, man. And lastly, if you manage to beat the game with Plo Koon, you will unlock a hidden level called Droidekas that lets you play through the Theed Palace level as said Droideka. This is pretty much the only one of these hidden modes that was actually fun. Rolling around as one of these things, firing off shots at Naboo pilots was great. It sucks that most everyone who ever owned this game never played this mode. Something I haven't really talked about so far is that the game features a co-op mode that lets you run through the whole game with a friend. You can both select any of the available characters to play as and run through the levels together. And let me tell you, I'm almost positive that this game was designed with co-op in mind. It could just be the fact that reportedly the PS1 doesn't have difficulty settings, but I think in general this game was intended to be played with a friend. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned that, have I? Jedi Power Battles has 2 difficulties to select from, an easy mode and a Jedi mode. But according to what I've read, selecting the easy mode option on the PS1 doesn't alter the difficulty at all. It's on Jedi mode no matter what you do unless you're playing on the Dreamcast. Anyways, so far as I could tell, having a friend with you doesn't actually affect the levels in any way. It's the same number of enemies in the same places with the same strength, so I'd probably recommend getting a friend who's good at video games if you're ever hoping to play through this one. The amount of Star Wars games out there that let you play couch co-op is pretty limited, so having this as an option at the very least is pretty cool. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect when I was going into this one. I had some vague memories of it from when I was a kid, but overall, I was actually kind of excited to get into this one and play it, only to wind up frustrated, disappointed, and unfulfilled. I was dreading going back into it more and more in between each playthrough. The game isn't even bad, it's just broken. If combat was balanced and the game wasn't so soul-sucking to try and play, then it would have probably been remembered a lot better than it was. That wasn't the case, however, and instead what we ended up with was a game so difficult that its difficulty has become the only thing it's known for. Reviewers of the game at the time all unanimously cited its difficulty as its biggest failure, claiming it needed more time being balanced and playtested. To this end, the PS1 version of the game holds a 57 on Metacritic. The Dreamcast version, however, apparently resolved this difficulty issue, and due to that, boasts a much better Metacritic of 76. That is quite the difference between 2 games that are nearly identical. As for the GBA version of Jedi Power Battles, it turned out to be significantly more like its PS1 counterpart than I was expecting. Unlike the PS1 and Dreamcast versions, which were both developed and published by LucasArts, Jedi Power Battles for the Game Boy Advance was developed by a studio called HotGen Studios Ltd. and published by THQ. In spite of that, however, HotGen made sure to use the LucasArts version of their game as their template, and definitely tried to replicate the original as best they they could to ensure players had a similar gameplay experience between platforms. The game launched in December of 2001 for North American audiences, roughly 8 months after the PS1 version and 2 months after the Dreamcast version. Also unlike its counterparts, the GBA version does not feature the Episode 1 moniker, despite being practically the same game, just downscaled to function on the GBA and missing a few features, most notable of which are the characters. The core game only has 3 main Jedi to choose from as opposed to 5. Gone are Adi Gallia and Plo Koon, but Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu all remain. Ki-Adi-Mundi is also missing, but he was only in the Dreamcast version anyway. Sometimes not including Ki-Adi-Mundi is probably the right call. Darth Maul can also be unlocked as a playable character, but this time he's actually equipped with his full double-bladed lightsaber as opposed to the main game where he only used one of the blades. He does carry over his lightning attack though, which is great. It makes him worth unlocking just for that. Though all of his standard attacks are pretty much useless compared to his jump. I guess it's because he's spinning his blades around like a windmill and it's catching whoever's close to him, but at some point I realized I could just jump through the enemies and wipe them all out without even trying. Outside of that, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Mace Windu all play pretty similarly to how they did in the main game, although I opted to use Qui-Gon for my playthrough here since he's a favorite of mine. The tech on display here is pretty ambitious for what the platform was capable of at the time, as it tries to mimic the 3D movement of the main game as much as it could. In my opinion, this worked far better for the combat than it did for the platforming, because gauging where things are in this game ends up being a gamble more often than not. I can't tell you how many times I was trying to make a jump only for my character to totally miss and just fall straight down. The most egregious instance of this is in the Gungan Ruins level, where you're expected to make a frame-perfect jump in order to continue. This one jump was so difficult that I ended up looking up a walkthrough just to see how to make it. And even after seeing it done, it still took me several minutes to nail down. If this one awful jump wasn't in here, then I'd honestly probably feel far better about this game overall than I do now. Unfortunately, this one pixel-perfect jump can end up adding a lot of frustration to what would otherwise be a fairly decent 1 to 2 hour Star Wars game. That isn't to suggest the rest of the game is some kind of exceptional hidden gem or anything. I mean, it's not even one of the better Star Wars games I've talked about, but it was the first one to release on the Game Boy Advance, and it was trying to recreate a game normally played on a far more powerful console. So, I'm cutting it some slack. The overall gameplay loop will consist of fending off a room of enemies, overcoming a platforming challenge, and then repeating that across 10 levels until the credits roll. Getting through those levels is a far more satisfying experience this time when compared to the PS1 version, however, as combating enemies feels a lot smoother and the game is more responsive to your inputs overall. You've got your basic attack button, your jump button, and then the left trigger offers a heavier slash attack. Then you can utilize a special force power which varies depending on which character you're playing as. Although this plays very similarly to the PS1 iteration, this version is far easier to get through. The bigger fauna bosses of the original are gone as well, such as the lizard creature from level 2 and the Tatooine sand creature from level 5, those being 2 of the more difficult encounters in the PS1 version. Really, the only major difficulty in this game will come from the platforming, and mostly because the GBA simply doesn't have the power needed to give us the kind of perspective needed to properly gauge these jumps. It probably wouldn't be as bad if they hadn't carried over the live system, but they did, so if you miss a jump more than a few times in a row, then it's back to the start of the level. Personally, I'd have preferred if they just reset you to the start of the most recent area you entered. Instead, you'll try to preserve your lives across each level and do your best to earn and find more as you go so you can complete the game. Although it may have done away with the Episode 1 moniker, don't be fooled, Jedi Power Battles is still very much just a direct adaptation of the events of the Phantom Menace. The levels are nearly identical to those found in the PS1 and Dreamcast counterparts unless the GBA version simply had to rework a part for feasibility reasons. We still start on the Trade Federation ship just like in the original, and for the most part, it's very close to the original level concept. They had to remove the big worker droid and trim down a few sections, but that was probably for the best if I'm being honest. We then moved to the Naboo swamps before heading into Theed and then the Naboo palace, so yeah, it's the exact progression of the original game level-wise. This level still sucks, but it's not as bad as it was in the original, which is the case for pretty much every level in this game actually. Following that we go to Coruscant, then to the Gungan Ruins, then Theed again, then the Palace Cliffside, and lastly, the final battle. They even bothered to design their own little version of the stat mission, although they had to change how it played for obvious reasons. I actually kind of like this. I said this about the PS1 version too, but I could have stood to play another mission or two like this. It was fun. But once you strike down Darth Maul and finish the last level, that's it. you're done with Jedi power battles. There aren't any special bonuses or hidden levels or anything other than unlocking Darth Maul with a password. Just the main 10 for you to play with. Now, as we've established, using Darth Maul is super fun, and as a kid who may have owned this in 2002, it would have probably been more than worth it to punch in that code and play through these levels as Darth Maul, or even just rerunning through them as Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, or Mace. So for what it was, I can see this having been a really great way for kids like me who grew up loving Star Wars to dive in and explore the different locations they saw in Episode 1 over and over again while on a road trip or in a waiting room or whatever. Looking back on it now, I still had a pretty good time going through it for this video, and since it can be beaten in just a couple of hours in one sitting, it may very well be worth it for you to put on a good podcast or retrospective, sit back, and just play through it in a single sitting for the fun of experiencing an old Star Wars action platformer. However, I'd say that same thing is true about most of the games on this list, several of which deserve that way more than this one, so before you get fired up to play some Star Wars, just know that you're probably going to want to hear about some of these other games first. As for Jedi Power Battles, I think it was really great for what it was, but has ultimately not aged very well. To be the first Star Wars game on the Game Boy Advance, it certainly helped pave the way for what a game like this was capable of, but was unfortunately plagued by attempting to replicate a game it simply wasn't capable of being on the technology that was available to it. HotGen Studios did a phenomenal job with what they were given, and I'm genuinely impressed with how close they were able to get this one to the original, but a few minor issues and frustrations, compounded by the availability of better Star Wars games on the same console, have just left this one feeling a bit dated by comparison. Looking back at the game's reception shows a Metacritic aggregate of just 58, which honestly feels a little harsh even to me. IGN even gave it a 4 out of 10, which I can assure you is just simply inaccurate. I know the enjoyment of a game is often subjective, but this game is not below average, but rather is right dead center in what it means to be average. Comparatively, GameZone's 8 out of 10 feels too high, as it is certainly not that good either. Rather, Game Informer's 6.25 feels like the most accurate score to me. Jedi Power Battles for the Game Boy Advance isn't a bad game by any means, nor is it a great one. It's just a fun and accessible option for fans of the series to experience the events of the first film in a video game format meant for a mobile console. It's got a few issues and hiccups that can make it feel frustrating to play at times, but those can be easily overcome with a little bit of concentration and repetition, which is not something I can say about the issues of the main game this one is attempting to replicate. It's not the best Star Wars game on the platform, nor is it the worst, but it is by far one of the most unique Star Wars action platformers you'll ever see, and that uniqueness remains its greatest quality. Ultimately, it was the PS1 version that I wanted to cover here, and walking away from that iteration has left me with far more negative feelings than positive ones. There are plenty of cool things about this game, however, and I think perhaps after I've put some distance between Jedi Power Battles and myself, maybe I'd like to come back and revisit the Dreamcast version to see if it managed to resolve the issues that currently weigh down the PlayStation version. Until then, this is not a game I'd ever recommend anyone checking out, even if they are fans of the series. Between the clunky and unreliable controls, lack of variety, and unbalanced gameplay, despite the immense amount of potential of the concept here, Star Wars Jedi Power Battles ends up being little more than a tiresome slog at the best of times and an unplayable joke at the worst. And really, that feels like such a shame because one look at this game will show you just how much work went into it. The team clearly cared about this project and wanted to create something both really fun and exciting to contribute to the larger Star Wars universe. Between all of the different characters we can play as, the immense variety of the levels, the couch co-op feature, and the overall satisfaction of the earlier hack-and-slash gameplay, there is no doubt in my mind that there's a brilliant game hidden here under a myriad of questionable polishing decisions. The worst part about the game is that most of the people who played it never got to see more than roughly 15% of it. My final thoughts about this game just leave me thinking about what LucasArts was thinking when they let this game get sent off for printing in this state. Was it deadlines? Were they running too far behind schedule for final polish and balancing? Or was this some kind of purposeful difficulty from the devs to ensure players faced a real genuine challenge upon playing? Whatever the answer, it won't be good enough to justify what this game turned out to be. A redundant, repetitive, overly convoluted mess that seeks more to waste your time than it does to entertain you. I had planned to do a video on the Dreamcast version later on, but since our friends over at Aspyr have decided to up and remaster this old classic, I had to jump in and see how they'd improved it. This was made even easier since Aspyr provided me with a review copy of the game, so thanks for that, much appreciated. I didn't let it go to waste, and by that I mean I 100% completed the game on Steam, which is like platinuming it, but there's not a catchy term for it on Steam, unfortunately. I didn't actually go through the game with any intention of 100% completion. In fact, my initial idea was to just play through it on a hopefully functioning easy mode, get some footage of the extra characters, and give my thoughts on the quality of the remaster itself. So here's the thing. I had to play through this game nearly a dozen times already when I was doing my coverage on the old PS1 version, which is the notoriously difficult and broken version of the game, and it nearly broke me along with it. The game was unfairly balanced and could be described as something close to a masochistic gameplay experience. During those many playthroughs with the different characters, I did become intimately familiar with the levels, layout, gameplay, and what the game looked and played like, which put me in a very peculiar situation regarding this remaster since the original was pretty fresh on my mind already. So why did I bother getting 100% with it then? I'm getting to that. Let's talk about what kind of job Aspyr did on this remaster first. They opted to utilize the Dreamcast version of the game for their remaster, and this was a very wise decision since that version of Jedi Power Battles released several months after the PS1 version, which gave the devs time to rebalance, alter, and polish the game after seeing the criticism of the market. Not to mention they added in Ki-Adi-Mundi for that version, because surely all the Star Wars fans at the time were desperate to play as the guy with the 12 head who had one on-screen line at the time this game released.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
Guess that line didn't age very well for the Disney canon fans. Also, you can save your comments about that one on-screen line joke. I already know he technically had 4 lines in the Phantom Menace. Also, did you know his head is that big because he's got an extra heart stored in there above his binary brain because his species have such powerful brains that they demand the additional blood flow and power of a second heart? Well, now you do. Anyways, back to this remaster. While I was playing through the game, I was noticing that there were several missing things that my brain distinctly remembered, particularly regarding the level design. At first, it was a few minor things, like the significantly more forgiving checkpoint system, or the far easier bordering totally remade balcony portion of the Theed Palace. But then I got to one of the most notable of these changes, and it's during the mid-level boss fight on Tatooine. I very clearly remembered there being a massive hole in the center of this boss arena, and I also vividly remember it being the source of some extreme frustration.
It ought to be here, but it isn't.
At first I was taken aback. I figured there was no way Aspyr would make such drastic changes to the game like this, even if they were beneficial. And, well, they wouldn't. I said earlier that I'd played the PS1 version, but not the Dreamcast one, and there's some pretty major differences between those two ports that drastically alters the difficulty. This boss arena is one of them. That said, let's talk about the actual remaster itself. It's pretty good, actually. About as good as I think could reasonably be expected of a remaster. The optimization is great, everything runs smooth, and there's some fun bonus content like concept art and extra characters, not to mention the return of cheats like the Big Head mode and a few others. But you have to both understand and accept that this game is hard. It's not nearly as difficult as the old PS1 version, of course, that one was downright unfair, but it is still very challenging to get used to. Not everyone is going to vibe with this. It's a game that demands you either get good at its design or find its exploits and lean on them. For example, if you mash the light attack button fast enough with Obi-Wan, you can just annihilate Darth Maul in his various encounters. This is where it gets a bit difficult to judge because all of the flaws I found in this game are just quirks of the original game. Aspyr did exactly what they said they would do. Made it pretty, upscaled it, and made it easily available for long-term public consumption. This is where you have to decide what side of the fence you're on about a developer's responsibilities regarding remasters. Is it the dev's responsibility to go in and alter it from the original so it's a better game, or just take the game exactly as it was and polish whatever that looks like, then release it on modern platforms? Personally, I've seen what it looks like when devs decide they need to modify a game to be quote-unquote better, and I'll take remasters like this every single time. Just give me that original game, but with optimization for modern hardware and availability on Steam. So I'm not going to rag on Aspyr for doing less in this case, as I think this might be a less is more situation. I played the game on an Xbox One controller, and it played as expected, if not better. Movement was smooth, attacks and jumps felt more responsive than they did on the PS1 for sure, and overall, I'd call this the best way to experience the game by far. The combat is some of the most by-the-book, beat-em-up platforming gameplay I think you could imagine. I mean, it's all obviously far too complex to have been seen on an arcade machine, but it definitely gives off the same vibes as those old arcade beat-em-ups, if that makes sense. The platforming isn't that hard here either. I mean, it felt way harder on the PS1 version, so here I just call it challenging. And the game even includes these little training challenges for you to play through so you can refine your platforming and combat skills, which is super nice. I liked this a lot. Oh yeah, and there's a 1v1 versus mode, which is super cool. There are very few real Star Wars fighting games out there, and with the inclusion of this mode, Jedi power battles can now be considered a certified Star Wars fighting game. When you put all of this together, what I think you end up with is a simple video game with a lot of potential for either fun or frustration. Depending on the type of person you are and the circumstance in which you play it, you'll either have a good time or a bad one. Sitting back on a weekend evening and playing through it with a friend is a recipe for enjoying Jedi power battles, but going through it solo after a long day is probably not a very good idea. However, pretty much all of that is just due to how the game is, and is not a consequence of anything Aspyr did with the remaster. So let's talk about the biggest new offering with this new release. The graphics. It all looks great. The texture work is high quality, the lighting looks fantastic, the characters are crisp, and I would say the whole game looks as good as anyone could reasonably expect. Although putting this game in such a clear image on modern hardware has brought a few issues, like why does Qui-Gon's head look like that? I mean, it's an old game, damn near 25 years old actually, so this is just part of what you get when you update such an old title, but in my opinion, it all looks great. Except for this one ship that looks like someone stretched a C-3PO texture over a speeder model. Seriously, why does it look like this? My frame rate was consistently buttery smooth, and the resolution was sleek and beautiful the whole way through, so on the visual end, I've got pretty much no complaints. However, there is one thing I really feel like I need to talk about. The original Jedi Power Battles was not a very cutscene-heavy game by any stretch. It featured one very cool opening cinematic and one canon-breaking ending cinematic. The only exception to this is a little over halfway through between levels 7 and 8 where one pre-rendered cutscene plays to whichever character you selected, walking through the streets of Theed as they deflect a series of blaster shots before acquiring a stap which you then use in the next mission. The neat thing about this is that the game shows whichever character you selected performing this action. Of course, this only applies to the primary characters you started with in the original game. So all previously unlockable characters and the new bonus characters in the remaster obviously do not get their own pre-rendered cutscenes, and it just defaults out to one of the original available cutscenes for this. Now, I feel like this could be a bit touchy, so I'm going to just give my honest take. I'm pretty sure those pre-rendered cutscenes have been upscaled for this remaster using AI. This isn't really a shock. I mean, Aspyr has been known to dabble in AI like this before, but I mean, okay, whatever the potential moral implications or debates regarding the overall use of AI aside, this just doesn't look good. Like, the results aren't bad, but they're not great either. Personally, I'm not strictly opposed to the use of AI tech in specific instances like this. Well, actually, in a perfect world, I am very much opposed to the very existence of AI and everything that comes from it, but realistically, down here in the real world where we all know AI is not going anywhere, I'd like to think there's a future where old pre-rendered cutscenes exactly like these could maybe be given new life by utilizing such technology in an ethical way. There's thousands of beautiful and artful old cinematics like these that otherwise stand no chance of being cleaned up or upscaled. That being said, this instance of AI upscaling is not high quality enough that I would consider it worthy of being shipped with a $20 remaster. It actually just looks kinda meh. I think it would have looked better if they just taken the original video, stretched the resolution out, and called it a day. In fact, let's run a quick comparison. Okay, well, maybe there's some things about the upscaled cutscenes that are better, but the biggest issue with AI upscaling is that weird shiny smear that's soaked across the screen. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but when you use AI to upscale videos, it results in this shiny layer of translucent goo plastered on everything. Not to mention the fact that certain details are shifty and inconsistent as the AI tries to recognize what it's generating. You know, I bet you they could have easily found one of those very talented SFM YouTubers and just thrown them a few $100s to recreate these cutscenes from scratch, and they'd have done so happily. In short, AI upscaling really just isn't there yet, and developers would be better off not using it until some significant improvements are made to that tech. Qui-Gon definitely knows he's not supposed to be here right now.
You've created a time paradox.
It's not like they're lazy or cheap. A ton of the art across this game has been totally recreated from scratch by some very talented artists. This is clear even from the main menu screen. Yeah, that's a drawn recreation of the PS1 menu, and it looks great. The original Dreamcast port this remaster is built on featured an awful background image that pasted Mace Windu's head on Obi-Wan's body. The menu is one of the only things the PS1 did better, so this was an intentional correction made by Aspyr to the benefit of the game by setting it back to the PS1 menu, but with a beautiful recreation of that image. Pretty much all of the artwork textures in this remaster look great. They did a fantastic job on the visual front in that regard. However, there is one enormous issue I feel like I have to point out. About halfway through the final mission, you have to navigate around these massive fans that can blow your character around and insta-kill you if you're not careful. The way you're supposed to handle this is by destroying these control panels on the tower. There's 3 of these above every fan, and you have to destroy them all, and there's quite a few of them here. Although all of these textures look fantastic, the fan control panels don't change texture to reflect damage. See, I had to play this last mission multiple times less than a year ago. I'm talking probably close to a dozen times, and because of that, my brain had the way to play this section down to a memory reflex. So without even thinking, I started whacking these fan control panels, but the thing is, they didn't register any change. In the original PS1 version of the game, they exploded and reflected the fact that they'd been destroyed, but this time around, they just emit a little smoke and don't change. This could be very problematic for newer players who don't know what to do with this part, or even people who haven't played the game in years and may have forgotten about doing this. Now, I need to point out that this is absolutely not Aspyr's fault. This is exactly how it was in the Dreamcast version. The devs just forgot to polish that little detail before the Dreamcast port released. So if anyone from Aspyr is watching, I would seriously encourage you to patch this somehow. These panels need to change texture to reflect their destroyed state for the good of the player's experience. Again, the way that it is actually does honor how the Dreamcast version of the game was, but if it's at all possible to correct this minor detail, I really do think it would improve the game significantly for first-time players. Another difference between the PS1 and Dreamcast versions is that the easy mode didn't work on the PS1 version, so the mode I was so familiar with was the harder Jedi mode difficulty. Well, it turns out on the functioning easy mode, these end-level light panels just change on a timer, which is fine. I mean, it honors the film and everything. This is great, no problem. On my first playthrough of this remaster, I just figured this was another improvement over the PS1 version where players had to navigate these corridors in a hyper-specific way to slowly deactivate the shields. That sucked, but I still did have that route sort of memorized, but when I realized that I wouldn't need it anymore, I just dropped it out of my brain. Then I played through this end mission a few times on easy mode with different characters, and it was great, no problem. Then, when I upped the game's difficulty to play on Jedi mode and got to this part, I faced the shocking realization that although I could sort of remember the route that night before, I had seemingly wiped it from my memory after gaslighting myself into believing I wouldn't need that information anymore, and now I had to relearn the pattern, and it sucks, and I'm not happy about it. Anyway, let's talk about the characters, of which there are many, possibly the most amount of characters I've seen you able to play in a single Star Wars game. The reason for this is because Aspyr, at some point in development, decided, screw it, you know what, let's just allow the player to play as literally any of the enemy NPCs they want. No, really, you can play as a multitude of iconic enemy characters like Weequay, Ishi Tib, Rodian, and who could forget about the fan favorite Mercenary? I guess they couldn't find a close-up for this one, so they just threw his concept art up there and called it a day. It looks mad out of place, but I mean, who really cares, I guess? Although, come to think of it, maybe they should have just gone with concept art for all of these extra bonus characters. I mean, they're already relegated to a separate section from the main selectable characters, and some of these close-ups look... I mean, that's really not even what Weequays look like in Star Wars. That is a very uncertain and potentially under-the-influence actor in a bodysuit. This is what Weequays are supposed to look like, by the way. You have to beat the game at least one time to unlock all of these silly characters like Jar Jar and the aforementioned enemy NPCs, but all of the original previously unlockable characters are now selectable from the start. Characters like Padme, Panaka, and Darth Maul, which is great and will make co-op sessions way more amusing. They also threw in a playable battle droid character from the start for some reason. I don't remember him being an unlockable character, and the other enemy droid characters are locked behind the New Game Plus tag, so I didn't really get this decision, but whatever, it's fine. You can also use a cheat to play as the game's first mini-boss, the Loader Droid. Most of these characters play completely differently from one another, and believe it or not, most of them will be more or less appropriate for certain missions. For example, you basically cannot complete the first mission with the battle droid. Hitting the end-level boss droid Starfighter is a fool's errand. I managed to do it with Padme, but with both the battle droid and Panaka, it just didn't seem to be possible.
I can't hit him.
The Jedi characters are all pretty good, but some are definitely easier to use than others. Obi-Wan and Mace Windu, for example, are probably two of the best in terms of how easy they are to use. Adi-Gallia and Ki-Adi-Mundi are pretty good too, although not quite as good as Obi-Wan or Mace. Qui-Gon and Plo Koon, on the other hand, are both much more complicated to master and feel almost useless until you've leveled up their abilities a bit more, and that sucks because Qui-Gon is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, so him being one of the less fun ones to play is a shame. Darth Maul is great though, very easy and fun to use, but I mean, of course he is. There is a brilliantly fun selection of characters to choose from here, and when you take into account the fact that this game was absolutely designed with co-op play in mind, the vision of how to make it fun becomes a little more clear. Should I talk about the bonus missions? I guess I should, though there's not much to them. You've got the Droidekas mission, where you play as you guessed it, Droideka, and roll around part of the Theed Palace killing as many Naboo pilots as you can, and then game-ending Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Mace Windu as the end-level bosses. It was probably a lot more novel as a fun little unlockable back in the day before you could just play any level as a Droideka, but I still had fun with it. Then you've got the Kadu race, which it's a button-mashing minigame. You just button-mash your way to the finish line, and it's harder than it looks, actually. I had to swap through my keyboard to beat this one. I wasn't able to unlock Gungan Roundup in my previous coverage of this game, since collecting all of the stupid artifacts across each mission on the PS1 version would have been a nightmare, so this one was new to me. Upon playing it for the first time, I realized I wasn't missing much because it sucks. You just zap Jar Jar 3 times in a row and send him into the enemy goal, and you win. Then, lastly, you've got the Survival Challenge, where you select any character you want and try to eliminate 100 enemies without dying, and oh, I'll get to that one. When I wrapped up with the game, I realized that I've played so much Jedi power battles at this point that I could probably draw a rough diagram of the layout of any given level from this game and be within the realm of 75% accuracy. It's not even like a form of torture, but more like a test of sheer endurance and willpower. Now look, I'm not a speedrunner, not by any stretch, but after going through these levels so many times at this point, I think I started to taste the masochistic psychosis state that said speedrunners enter after pouring so much time into one game. I knew each level intimately and felt beyond confident that I could completely eradicate this game's available achievements in 2 solid gameplay sessions, and that's exactly what I did. See, it got personal. This version of Jedi Power Battles was nothing compared to the PS1 port. That version really is a form of torture, but this one, easier than sleeping by comparison. So I said to myself that I may as well lean in and make it worth my time, especially since the achievements aren't even that hard to get. Besides, since I didn't get my review copy of the game until the day it was already out, I had already lost that race before it ever started, and having 100%ed the game would make the video more interesting anyway. So I did it, and it went smoothly for the most part. When all was said and done, I checked to see I'd poured 13.5 hours into the game, which doesn't seem like a lot at first, or when compared to other games, but this particular game only takes roughly 4 hours to complete if you're relatively good at video games already. But I beat each mission multiple different times to get footage with different characters, learn their playstyles, compare differences, and of course, collect all of the achievements. Honestly, the only real issue I had to overcome in all of this was beating that final survival challenge mission. That one is brutal and accounted for over an hour and 40 minutes of my playtime just by itself. You only get 4 power-ups and only one of them heals you, and the way the rocket enemies drop in and the droidekas just spam you with lasers, it's insane. It's torture. But other than that one mission, after having played the PS1 version, this one was nothing but a good time in comparison. It's still got its handful of cheap tricks and retro game nonsense, but for the most part, each level can be easily overcome with a healthy implementation of learning the level layout and mastering the controls. There is still that one major question, however, regarding the remaster. Is it worth the $20 they're charging for it? And the answer is, I'd say, maybe? Ultimately, that's going to depend a lot on your personal taste in video games, but even then, $20 feels like a lot to pay for Jedi power battles. The game itself is great, it's fun, it's a good time, but I say all of that wrapped within the context of what the game itself actually is. A mindless, arcade-like beat-em-up with a Star Wars coat of paint. Although I've seen a few people attacking this remaster already as being terrible, so my saying it was a good time might just be that Stockholm Syndrome kicking in. I mean, there's no real story or dialogue save a few lines here and there, and even those don't really mean anything. The levels are admittedly themed around being a loose adaptation of the events in the Phantom Menace, but it's far from resembling anything I'd call faithful to those events. You get the point. It's a very video gamey video game. It's the exact kind of game the average person used to think all video games were back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The biggest selling point here is easily the local couch co-op feature, which I can't show off since I didn't have anyone available to demonstrate it on such short notice, but the entire game is totally playable with a second player cooperatively. If they'd bothered to figure out how to make it playable online, I'd probably say without hesitation that it's worth $20, but unfortunately they didn't. I was a bit more comfortable saying Bounty Hunter was worth $20 than I am saying that about this one, but I do also see Aspire's formula here. And I think that $20 price tag is what they've determined is needed to see the game make a reasonable enough profit to justify continuing this pursuit. Realistically, both that Bounty Hunter remaster and this Star Wars Jedi Power Battles remaster are probably worth about $10, unless you're a pretty big Star Wars fan like myself, or you just love the gameplay style of these games. Even if I hadn't been given a review code for this game, I personally would have probably been comfortable paying the $20, but that's only if they keep serving up these old school Star Wars remasters without altering the original game at all. Preservation of old video games as an art is important to me, and I'm willing to pay for that. But if they start removing or altering content within these games for any reason, I'm out. I'm not going to suggest they might be worth any price tag. These aren't Night Dive level remasters anyway, but they're the next best thing, and I'll take this over something like the Dead Rising remaster any day. Whatever, it's done. I've played through and talked in depth now about the PS1 version, the Game Boy Advance version, and since this remaster is literally just a polished up port of the Dreamcast version, I've beaten that one now too. And not just beaten it, 100% completed it. I've collected all of the Infinity Stones of the Star Wars Jedi Power Battles Gauntlet. That's it. I'm done with Jedi Power Battles. There's nothing else left for me to talk about. Inarguably and definitely one of the Star Wars games of all time, Obi-Wan's Adventures for the Game Boy Color is an isometric action-adventure game developed by Hotgen Studios and released in North America on November 24th in the year of our Lord 2000. Then, just a few weeks later, on December 8th in Europe. Its development was actually part of an agreement struck between LucasArts and THQ that granted THQ the licensing rights to publish Star Wars games on the Game Boy Color. Obi-Wan's Adventures was one of the two games that they would end up publishing on the handheld console under this contract, with the other being Yoda Stories. When Hotgen and THQ initially began developing this game, it was under the pretense that it would act as the mobile iteration of the Star Wars Episode 1 Obi-Wan video game that was being developed by LucasArts for the PC at the time, but that game ended up undergoing a massive delay before being moved to the Xbox. So Hotgen had to make some changes to their game and release it under a different Star Wars subtitle. That part is fact, but this next part is just speculation on my end. I personally think Hotgen pivoted early on in development to try and make this game into a Jedi Power Battles mobile iteration. Not only do they feature a nearly identical structure with many of the same locations and a similar level progression, but they were also being developed around the same time, too. They even released only a few months apart from one another, with Obi-Wan's Adventures launching only 6 months after the PS1 version of Jedi Power Battles and roughly 1 month after the Dreamcast version. What's more is that the real handheld iteration of Jedi Power Battles for the Game Boy Advance wouldn't actually hit store shelves until well over a year after its Dreamcast counterpart had already released, and a year and a half after its PS1 counterpart. And that version was also developed by the same studio that made this game anyway, and it shows because they play very similarly to each other. So I think it's easy to take a guess at what happened here. I'm thinking that after the Obi-Wan game started facing development problems and Hotgen realized that they weren't going to be able to attach their handheld game to that subtitle's name anymore, they requested the Jedi Power Battles name by LucasArts instead, since that was probably closer to release at the time. And so HotGen probably started scrambling to open some lines of communication with the team making Jedi Power Battles and start prototyping their handheld game to coincide with that, which would explain why it just feels like playing a prototype version of their GBA Jedi Power Battles game that would end up coming out roughly a year later.
You think I had a choice? But I got a nice, easy charter now. I'll pay you back, plus a little extra. I just need a little more time.
So why didn't this game just launch as Jedi Power Battles on the Game Boy Color? Again, I'm just guessing here, but it's possible THQ received word of the Game Boy Advance's release on the horizon and pressured HotGen to put out a Star Wars game within the year before the value of their Game Boy Color license was swallowed up by the shiny new GBA's release. And since the game wasn't quite ready enough to accurately resemble the Jedi Power Battles name yet, given it didn't feature more than one playable Jedi character, they just called it Obi-Wan's Adventures and shipped it out. All of that is just speculation, but everything about this game feels like I'm playing a prototype of their Jedi Power Battles GBA port. Even Flandreau shared this sentiment in his own coverage of the game.
Wait, this looks a lot like a Game Boy version of Jedi Power Battles. Well, I think that's exactly what the game started its life as, but they didn't have enough time to include other playable characters apart from Obi-Wan, so they just changed the name.
So how about actually playing the game though? Well, it's mostly fun, surprisingly. The first half is a pretty good time, the kind of typical isometric beat-em-up type action you'd expect from a game like this. The second half of the game though, well, it's quite a bit more annoying. There's a few little design choices here and there that ended up causing me to add nearly a full hour to my playtime unnecessarily. If you already know what to do, then this game can be easily completed in roughly an hour or so, give or take a few minutes. It's a short playthrough of 9 levels, 2 or 3 of which are significantly shorter than the others. So it's a quick campaign to complete, except if you're new to it and fall for this rock red herring that makes you think that this is how you progress, when really it just fills in a pathway for you to avoid using these jump pads. This is so useless. It does nothing beneficial for you, but it did distract my brain into thinking I was missing the thing I was supposed to do with this rock to move on. In reality, the path forward was just hidden by some greenery I had to break. In fairness, there are other instances of the game requiring you to break an obstruction like this, but I mean, come on, you can't even tell that there's a door behind this unless you're looking really hard. Right after this, by the way, you're faced with a couple of puzzles, one of which just actually took me a while to figure out the correct sequence needed to force push these rocks to complete. This one threw me for a loop because the game tells you nothing at all. I had to piece together that there's 2 floor panels that can only be pressed via the pressure of the rocks, and then force push them all in the correct sequence without running out of force energy. The force doesn't recharge in this game. You have a limited number of uses, and you can find individual slot refills throughout the levels, but if you use them all before you figured out the right sequence to force push these rocks, then you'll have to just restart the level outright. Honestly, all of this game's weird time-wasting aspects are stuffed into this one out-of-place Egypt-looking level too, because right after this, we have to use these glyphs to determine how to cross this bridge without falling to our death. I'm sorry, I didn't know I was playing Indiana Jones, that's my bad. And weirdly, if you don't push forward to maintain momentum during a specific jump with this jump pad, you'll also fall to your death. What? Why? I don't think there are any other jump pads like this in the game. There's plenty of other regular jump pads, but why does this specific one require me to keep pushing forward or Obi-Wan will fall? I spent like 5 minutes looking for some kind of bridge or extension or rock to use the force on to close the gap because I didn't realize this jump pad was usable if you just hold the direction that Obi-Wan jumps. And why does this look like an Indiana Jones tomb level anyway? In case you're wondering, this level takes place in the so-called Theed Catacombs as Obi-Wan makes his way to the city streets to head for his confrontation with Darth Maul. It's the most out-of-place level in the game, but because of that, it's also the level I'll talk about the most because other than this, everything else in this game is just a rehash of the same Episode 1 levels we've already seen at this point. We start on the Trade Federation ship like we've all come to expect before. The second level takes us to a sequence on the Trade Federation lander. This part I think may be a holdover from when when this was being developed as a handheld iteration of the Star Wars Obi-Wan game, since that one also features an entire level set on the lander Obi-Wan boards as he fights his way through it. Then it's down to the Naboo swamps for the next two missions, one of which actually sees us piloting the Gungan Bongo in the only vehicle sequence of the game, and also the only sequence in any Star Wars game that lets players control the Bongo, so that's cool. Then, in what is arguably the best aspect of Obi-Wan's adventures, the game outright skips a certain desert planet and takes us straight to Coruscant, where we fight across a myriad of rooftops against a bunch of bounty hunters and mercenaries. This is another one of the things that made me think this was also being developed as a Jedi Power Battles game at one point. I mean, let's face it, this does look just like that game's Coruscant levels. And then we get to the catacomb level I was complaining about before, which also looks suspiciously like the Theed cliffside levels from Jedi Power Battles as well. Then, these levels 7 and 8 closely resemble the Theed streets and palace levels from Jedi Power Battles, also even featuring sequences where we rescue handmaidens and platform across the palace's exterior. So I think we can all agree that this is just Jedi Power Battles for the Game Boy Color, right? Though I think this might be the easiest that the ending battle with Darth Maul has been so far. It does differ a bit in gameplay though, and by a bit, I do mean a very minute amount. In addition to your lightsaber attack and your force powers, Obi-Wan can also use a blaster pistol to shoot at people, an attack I found to be very unreliable because of how hard it is to make your character shoot at the intended target. So I very rarely ever use this thing in my playthrough.
So uncivilized.
Star Wars Obi-Wan's Adventures is a fun enough little experience, but it's unfortunately been smothered by being a simplistic handheld version hybrid of two different console games. At its core, it's just another video game playthrough of the Phantom Menace storyline, which we have more than enough of already. Beyond that, all of the additional fluff and features that may sell people on the experience have been usurped by the release of better alternatives. Nearly all of the levels are just less polished iterations of the levels we'd go on to see in the GBA version of Jedi Power Battles. The gameplay is a little bit unique, but still somehow worse than a number of other better isometric Star Wars games on offer by now. Even in its concepts, pretty much all of this game is just an amalgamation of ideas for two other games chiseled down into a passable handheld game experience. It's not like there's a ton of things wrong with it or anything. I mean, it plays fine, it looks fine for a GBC game, and it actually sounds better than a lot of the other games on the console. The soundtrack is particularly noteworthy, featuring tons of recognizable riffs and leitmotifs from the film's score that are expanded on and altered in interesting little ways that I've never heard before, which is super cool. But other than that, there's just not really anything here interesting enough to warrant a playthrough, even from the most passionate of Star Wars fans, except maybe the novelty of piloting the Bongo and experiencing the weird Theed catacombs. Those two things, along with a few fun little 8-bit iterations of different Star Wars themes, are the only real unique aspects about Obi-Wan's adventures. It's not good, nor is it bad. It's just not necessary either. A stepping stone for the developer to pursue bigger titles, and a means for THQ to get one more Star Wars game out on the Game Boy Color before its lifespan was over.
Stop, Jedi!
Star Wars Obi-Wan is one of the strangest Star Wars games I've ever played. Not strange in like a wacky, bizarre kind of way, but more so in a how did this even end up like this kind of way. It's one of the few Star Wars games I had literally zero experience with before sitting down to play it for this video, but also one I've always been really interested in checking out. I mean, come on, it's a third-person action game where you play as the Obi-Wan Kenobi, and given my affinity for old Xbox games anyway, it always seemed like something that'd be an obvious match for me. I love the pitch, the design, the style. I even love the silly green cover from back in that super short-lived era where Xbox cover arts were trying to match the green aesthetic of the Xbox's marketing. Those were good times. Not only that, but it's also been one of the highest requested games for me to cover for well over a year now, and after finally sitting down to play it,
I'm not sure.
So I'm of two minds about this game. On the one hand, this is a really charming little Xbox game. The control scheme is ambitious and unique, the environments are varied and sometimes exciting, and I mean, who doesn't want to play as Obi-Wan and fight through a bunch of Jedi adventures with a lightsaber? At this point in time, we'd gotten the direct video game adaptation of the Phantom Menace where we got to play as Obi-Wan a good bit, but this one was designed around the lightsaber combat specifically, which is what I feel like we all wanted back then, right? There's a lot of things to love about this game, from the unique approach to lightsaber combat to the fun design of some of these different environments you get to explore. On the other hand, it sucks. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Star Wars Obi-Wan sucks. It's not a good game, and my experience with it wasn't very enjoyable for a myriad of reasons. That said, though, the fact that it isn't good and I didn't really enjoy it is so unfortunate because I can literally tell that it's almost good, and that makes it all the worse. Some games are flawed from the foundation up, built on bad game design ideas or poorly executed concepts. In the case of Star Wars Obi-Wan, I feel like all of the major problems come from the fact that the game literally just isn't done. Like, it's not complete. This is not a finished game, dude. The actual core of the game is honestly pretty good, and a lot of the ideas are really fun too, but playing it feels like watching a movie that went over budget and missed multiple deadlines trying to overcome problems during production to make it work, causing the team to lose all of the time they'd slotted to polish and post-production.
The Force is your ally, and a powerful one it is. Use what you have learned, and you may hope to escape.
Seriously, this game does not feel at all like a completed retail release that was published and sold in stores. Rather, it feels like some kind of leaked beta build of a game LucasArts was prototyping and canceled that found its way onto the internet years later. I've talked before about how LucasArts seemed to have a tendency to rush titles out the door before they were ready back then, but never has it ever felt so egregious as it does with this one. For one example, the levels are way bigger than they should be. Not like long or time consuming, I mean like literally physically there's so many giant empty areas. Even my girlfriend noted how everything looked so empty in the game while I was playing it. Some parts of some levels look really cool, particularly a few on Naboo and Coruscant that I found to be a lot more fulfilled, but that only made the more empty parts seem worse by comparison. All of the environments either look completely finished in detail or barely started with basically no in-between. The gameplay feels unpolished and oftentimes unresponsive with some bizarre decisions that I'll get into later.
I'm not sure.
The voice acting is all over the place. More than half of the plot is just a bunch of disconnected, made-up events loosely and forcefully connected to the events of the Phantom Menace, and to top it all off, the actual progression of most of these missions and the placement of items ranges from questionable to outright bad. All of this is just set up to provide you the lens with which I'll be looking at the game, and I promise it's not all going to be negative. But I needed to frame exactly what it is we're dealing with here. There's still a lot to love about this game, and I'm gonna talk about it. Originally announced in May of 1999 as Star Wars Episode 1 Obi-Wan, it's pretty clear that the plan was for it to fall in line with the plethora of other direct Phantom Menace tie-in games that sported the Episode 1 moniker. As we can see though, that moniker was dropped at some point during development, and the game simply became Star Wars Obi-Wan instead, despite being a loose retelling of the film's events. Believe it or not, this game was originally being developed as a PC exclusive, with many rumoring it to be planned as a successor to the fan favorite Dark Forces 2, with this old coverage referring to it as the next game in the Dark Forces / Jedi Knight series. In hindsight, it's probably better that it didn't go down like that, because this game doesn't really feel anything like those games, so it wouldn't have made much sense. Also, if this game really did feature motion capture technology, then they shouldn't have wasted their time, because it all looks blocky and hand animated anyway. According to what I was reading about it, the decision to make it an Xbox exclusive game came from George Lucas himself, but I couldn't trace the statement back to a proper source since the webpage has been removed. What I did find is this article stating that the initial idea behind the game wasn't going to be possible given the technology they were working with at the time, which is probably what caused the speculation that they moved it from a PC title to the Xbox.
You want the impossible.
Based on that comment about the scope of the project being too big for them to execute on it properly, and the dropping of the Episode 1 moniker, I have this suspicion that at some point in development, the game pivoted to try covering every event in Obi-Wan's life, taking him through Episode 1, 2, and then into Episode 4, in order to make it into more of an Episode 2 tie-in game rather than Episode 1. Especially since a host of other Episode 2 games were probably being prepped at the time to coincide with its release. I mean, Attack of the Clones did release in theaters less than 5 months after this game came out, and they even featured Obi-Wan's photos from Episode 2 and 4 in the game and a loading screen along with his Episode 1 design, so they were clearly trying to tie it in that way. I'm guessing the team probably looked at what they had so far after roughly 2 years of work and decided it wouldn't be worth it to sink any more time or resources into the project, and just tried to wrap it up as fast as they could and shove it on the Xbox, since it was the console with few enough Star Wars games that people might buy it due to a lack of alternatives. All of that is just my speculation though, but it would help explain the game feeling so messy and rushed. If you somehow weren't able to tell by now, I'm obviously not playing this on analog hardware. This footage is being emulated, and surprisingly, the game is playable from start to finish via emulation now after years of that not being the case. Technically. It's still far from an optimal or even recommendable way to experience the game due to a few things, mainly the constant graphical and lighting issues, but also severe stuttering in one or two parts of the game and frequent crashes. Playing through it probably net me over a dozen crashes, and the game is only like 5 hours long, so that's kind of insane. So I know you might be thinking, well, couldn't the shoddy emulation be the cause of a lot of the issues you had with the game?
I wish that was so.
None of my criticisms really have anything to do with the game's stability or graphics. I grew up trying to play PC games in the early 2000s on a home computer that could barely run them. Things like this aren't new to me, and I'm used to overlooking them. Most of the game runs flawlessly, and even if it didn't, you only need to play 10 to 15 minutes of the game to have basically experienced the whole gameplay loop anyway. I've disregarded any potential critiques of graphics, optimization, or stability here. It's all about the game's direction, design, and presentation. But you know what? There are a few really cool ideas found across the earlier levels of the game that I wanted to talk about, and like I said earlier, it's not a direct adaptation of the Phantom Menace, so there's a handful of original missions here that give the game a bit of its own story.
What are you doing?
I'm not sure.
Star Wars Obi-Wan starts off strong, dropping us off in a beautiful section of Coruscant where Obi-Wan gets spotted by some nearby thugs before being attacked. This actually feels like one of the only missions where the level designers even had time to actually try. The world is populated with signs, structures, and even NPCs, pretty much all of which become less frequent after we leave Coruscant. There are 5 chapters to play across the game's progression, each of which features several areas to traverse across as you fight enemies and overcome a series of platforming challenges. Chapter 1 here is of course out on Coruscant, which I love because I can't get enough of the seedy city planet. Obi-Wan has come to this street to investigate some recent reports of activity related to a local crime gang called the Black Heth. There's not really much lore to the Black Heth to discuss, but that's because, like pretty much everything else in this game outside of the movie's plot, the developers just kind of made it up to fill the space and justify the gameplay. Obi-Wan cuts through a bunch of thugs indiscriminately and moves some luggage out of the way so a train can proceed. After that, he heads back to present his findings to the Jedi Temple. Here, Obi-Wan reports to the Council what he found in those streets when he's informed that he'll need to prepare for what is to come.
Then you must prepare yourself, Obi-Wan. Let us proceed to the trial arena.
And we're taken to the Saber Arena. This Saber Arena acts both as a practice area for the player to learn the game and as complete filler content to pad the runtime across the levels. What I mean by that is that the game sends you here 5 times within the single-player story mode, 4 of which are mandatory to progress, and all of which are just you in the same area fighting one or multiple opponents, most of which are from the Jedi Council. This is such a cheap way to extend the game's playtime. Like, I get that each of these only takes 5 or 6 minutes to overcome, but they're all still injected between areas and require loading screens to get to them, and the worst part is, they literally don't teach the player anything after this initial sequence. There's no unlockable moves or anything, you can do everything right from the start, so it's not like we're learning a new ability, these are kind of just a waste of time. Looking at it from a more positive angle though, the saber combat is the star of the show here, and this was a way to allow players a chance at having more one-on-one lightsaber encounters than the one ending fight with Maul they'd have otherwise. Anyway, we beat the droid here, and Obi-Wan goes out on another solo venture guided by Qui-Gon over comms, where he arrives at a Black Heth landing pad, tasked with locating and rescuing a particular informant who is a close friend of Qui-Gon's. This is another pretty good level, and well populated with initial assets laid out in a decently enjoyable way. But again, don't be fooled because this game puts its best foot forward. If the whole game was as good as these first few levels, I'd have more good things to say. We have to navigate our way across a series of different floors, making our way down this building currently under construction and into the Black Hath hideout, and it's pretty fun. I was enjoying this part. I also have another baseless hunch that the game was at some point hoping to feature these Coruscant levels later in the game to tie in with Episode 2, rather than the player starting here with this little side plot, but again, that's just a hunch. Once we reach the inner levels of the area, Obi-Wan finds the Quarren informant and the two exchange a very brief dialogue about the gang's plans.
They are receiving large shipments of arms and plan on turning Coruscant into a war zone. Let's go!
That was literally it. I didn't really cut out anything important, that's all he told us. Obi-Wan heads out to a Black Hath-occupied landing pad to stake the place out until he can intercept an arms deal and discover who the street gang is receiving weapons from. Qui-Gon tells him to place a tracking beacon on the ship to find out where it came from when Obi-Wan gets spotted by the criminals.
I will, Master. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh indeed. There's only one thing to do now. Ah man, he smashed into the invisible Coruscant sky floors. You gotta watch out for that. This game was in development for like 2 years, by the way. Am I being too harsh? How did Dark Forces 2 from like 5 years before this game came out handle this? Guess Nar Shaddaa doesn't have the invisible sky floors. Anyway, this area only consists of these landing pads that we fight across before placing a tracer on the target ship. It's a short area, but still cool. I love the busy skyline and scale of the environment we're in with how populated and animated everything looks. It's a pretty solid way to end Chapter 1, and honestly, I was having fun up until this point. With the tracer placed, Obi-Wan returns to the Council where Mace Windu tells the Padawan and his master that they tracked the ship back to the planet of Obi-Wan, homeworld of the Jin Ha, a warrior race known for arms dealing and cortosis manufacturing. That's right guys, it's literally always cortosis. We can't go straight to Obi-Wan to confront the Jin Ha though, or the game would be over too soon to be sold at a retail price, so we've got to head back to the Saber Arena and train with Jedi Master Saisi Tiin.
You were scared when the Jin Ha attacked. Your weapon could not save you.
No,
You felt fear.
I'm not sure.
You will feel fear again.
You might be wondering who that is, but trust me, you know Saisi Tiin. Let me just spark your memory real quick. That hasn't canonically happened yet, but we're about to give him a premonition of his future. Anyway, Masters Plo Koon and Eth Koth went to Obi-Wan before the Council lost contact with them, and now Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan head to the planet to find them. Here in the Jin Ha Swamp is where my problems with this game started to really manifest. First off, look at these levels. For literally the next 15 minutes of gameplay, the player just runs across these enormous barren terrain, occasionally killing a band of Jin Ha warriors. That's it. That's the level until we reach the entrance to the Cortosis mines. This part isn't actually so bad. There's sections of it that are a lot more detailed than the part leading to it, and it does have some impressive visual design and a fun layout to fight through. Sometimes. I'd say less than half of this map is actually interesting, and the other half is made up of these supersized, repeated texture hallways. Like a shocking amount of this level really is just running through these hallways fighting Jin Ha warriors, and that's literally it. There's also some platforming, and it's the worst platforming in the whole game because Obi-Wan's tank controls are so fidgety and don't always do what I want him to do, like turning and moving forwards are bound to the same stick, and this is so not a good control scheme for platforming. I mean, that's about it. Most of this level is hallways, and there is a bit where the game starts stuttering, I assume due to emulation, but if you just run through it, you'll be fine. I did really like this big Cortosis processing room though. It honestly might be one of the coolest set pieces the game has to offer because of how important Cortosis is to all of the legend stories from this era. It's cool to fight through and see a room like this in a 3D environment to get a sense of its scale and what it all looks like, not to mention force pushing people into it. At the end of these hallways is a giant room where Obi-Wan finds the evidence they needed.
Master, I think I found the Cortosis refinery. There's some strange technology here. Some kind of synthesis device.
Excellent, Padawan. See if you can get a sample from one of the computers or something. We'll have it analyzed on Coruscant.
Alright, we need to talk about the voice acting in this game. This entire next area is just the exact same one we just fought through, but in reverse with no changes, so there's literally nothing to say about it anyway. Most of the voice acting in Star Wars Obi-Wan is fine by the standard of that time. I'm pretty sure nearly all of them were just brought over from their work on the original Phantom Menace tie-in game. Qui-Gon, Padme, and Panaka, for instance, all have the same cast as they did in that one, but Obi-Wan has been replaced by Louis MacLeod, a competent voice actor in his own right, known for his voice in several other Star Wars games, but man, I do not think this was a good decision. Or maybe it was the best decision, depending on how you look at it.
Some kind of synthesis device.
Oh, not good.
Scott Cleaverden did Obi-Wan's voice in the Phantom Menace game and Jedi Power Battles, and I thought he sounded fine. Was he not available or something? They managed to get everyone else from that game's voice cast for this one. It's odd they wouldn't have brought him back as well. No hate on anyone's work here, but come on. This sounds like MacLeod is doing an intentionally overacted impression of Cleaverden's impression of McGregor's performance.
I'm not sure.
Anyway, Obi-Wan relinks with Qui-Gon, who has rescued Plo Koon and Eth Koth, and we get one last fight outside of the Jinha's factory before the chapter ends, which is cool. I liked this bit. Getting to fight alongside these other Jedi Masters is an awesome moment, and a highlight of the game. That's it though. The end of Chapter 2, the resolution of the Jinha subplot, and the last of Star Wars Obi-Wan's unique narrative contributions, with one exception that I'll get to soon. Moving on to Chapter 3 of the game, we of course have to head back to the Saber Arena and train with Master Plo Koon.
Learn, Padawan. Your blade may someday save your life.
Wait, what did he say?
Your blade may someday save your life.
You know, it wasn't until right now that I realized that character has literally no speaking lines in the movies. He always just kind of sits there. Even when he dies, he's still just sitting there. All of these characters are the exact same, by the way. This isn't real training. Every single melee character, be them Jinha, Droid, or Jedi, features the exact same moveset as the player character. Once you fought one, you fought them all, except Force users can push you sometimes. They're literally all the same.
It is no small thing to defeat a Jedi Master in combat.
And yet we will do so multiple times across this game. Anyway, we're headed to the Trade Federation Lucrehulk class battleship to pick up where the Phantom Menace does, as Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan enter the conference room to await the Viceroys for negotiations.
The negotiations were short.
None of the events we've just seen in the first two chapters of this game are canon to the EU so far as I could tell, and both the Black Heth and the Jinha only exist in this game and aren't mentioned outside of it, so it's basically just a bunch of made-up non-canon subplot, which can be fun, but I'm just saying there's no lore or anything for me to talk about here. I'm not skipping anything there, it's all just made-up non-canon material.
It does not exist.
So we're finally in sync with the events of the film, and this whole area is just a different version of the same sequence we've seen across multiple other games at this point, although I will say it somehow features less interesting progression than the games that came before it, despite being made on newer technology. Once again, most of this mission is just hallways, but we do get a cool scene where we find the ship we arrived on in pieces.
Need some help, Obi-Wan?
Hello?
They destroyed our ship!
Oh, so you noticed that, huh? We can't progress here because there's a turret that will kill you, so we have to find the turret's control systems, disable the turret, and then make our way back to the hangar again. And it's all hallways, dude. It's all the same textured hallways repeated. What the hell happened during this game's development cycle to cause this? Jedi Outcasts came out literally 3 months after this, by the way. I don't feel like I'm being harsh here, but one of the biggest flaws this game has are the reliance on these repeated hallway areas that just started to make my brain go numb. Also, once again, they're way too damn big and empty. Are you guys noticing that? I'm pretty much positive that these hallways were not this enormous compared to the characters in the film, right? Like, the halls are big, but they're not this big. Seriously, why did they do this? It makes an already monotonous level layout feel even more exhausting. I'm nitpicking now, we need to move on. The second area of this level gets a lot better and has a more deliberate layout to it and far more variety in the environments, like tank hangars, vents, corridors, and bridges. Really, the second area basically saves the whole level because that first part is rough. We get to see the iconic Qui-Gon door scene play out too, which is pretty cool, although it definitely overstays its welcome. The next level takes place on the C-9979 landing craft Obi-Wan stows away on to ride into Naboo like we saw in the film, and it's really just more of the same as the last mission. A lot of similar hallways and rooms to what we saw in the last level, only with the requirement that we disable the engines of the ship to force an emergency landing. It's fine. There's nothing really notable about it though beyond this ending duel with a kind of advanced combat droid wielding a Cortosis sword. At first I thought it was a vibroblade, but it's not.
A Cortosis sword!
After that, we head straight into the city of Theed, skipping the initial arrival and Gungan plot points from the film entirely and starting us off on the Tri-Bubble Bongo submarine, which honestly surprised me. I was fully expecting at least one area in the swamps of Naboo where we fight some droids, given we've already gotten a full level of environment that looks exactly like the Naboo jungle earlier in the game. They could have literally reused these assets, changed a few things, color corrected some textures to make it look a little different, and build a whole level like this. And it is by no means beneath this game to reuse assets or even entire areas to save on time and resources, because it does exactly that frequently. This isn't a complaint or anything, it's probably better they didn't do this because that level sucked anyway. I'm just really surprised they didn't is all. Anyway, these Theed levels actually look beautiful. There was great care taken in the design of both the interior and exterior areas of Theed, and they have some genuinely great moments. It's also in these levels that I finally put my finger on why this game felt so familiar to me while I was playing. Because it's Star Wars Bounty Hunter.
And where is this bounty hunter now?
The movement, the animations, the shooting mechanics, the platforming, the 5-chapter story layout, all of it. It all feels just like playing Bounty Hunter did. Not counting the lightsaber combat and force powers, of course. I very quickly realized that LucasArts took the skeleton of what they'd built with this game and overhauled it into what became Bounty Hunter, and I actually think that's kind of awesome. I'm kind of disappointed I didn't know about this sooner, because it would have been cool to cover them in order and show that progression, but either way, as strange as it may seem, Bounty Hunter is very much the spiritual successor to Star Wars Obi-Wan. Of course, I'd say Bounty Hunter is a much better game than Obi-Wan, but mechanically, these are two games in the same series so far as I'm concerned. I mean, look at how Obi-Wan equips a sniper rifle and fires it at people, and it even shares the same clunky inventory system, though with less items to deal with in this one. Anyway, there's not a lot else to say about the levels in Chapter 3 overall, other than them feeling the most complete out of any others in the game. Across the 3 levels, the layout and design have a natural progression with verticality and interesting landmarks without relying on long repetitions of hallways. If the rest of the game was at the same level of quality as Chapters 1 and 3, I think the game would have felt far more enjoyable. It's a good thing Obi-Wan basically never left the ship while they were on Tatooine in the film, otherwise the developers might have tried to stuff some unnecessary Tatooine levels in there. In The Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is on the ship practically the entire time they're on Tatooine, only seen stepping off of the vessel briefly one time to help load in their winnings after the pod race, which presented an interesting challenge to the team about how to go about including Tatooine into the game, and their answer was the same as it was with how they handled the first 2 chapters. They just made a bunch of stuff up.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
Apparently, some Tusken Raiders have managed to kidnap the Queen from the ship somehow without alerting or hurting anyone on board and without Obi-Wan sensing or stopping it from happening in any way. This whole chapter must have been something they were rushing to fit into the game before release, because it's only 2 levels long, with one of those levels being a boss fight, so this is easily the shortest chapter in the game. These levels are also the most guilty of my frequent criticisms about the level design so far. Pretty much all of the Tatooine areas are just massive, empty landscapes that take forever to run across and feature some of the most unnatural looking climbable areas we encounter. It's true part of that could be because Tatooine itself is just a giant desert, but when it comes to making an action game set on Tatooine have compelling and interesting level design...
That's the real trick, isn't it?
I could see where they were trying to spice things up a little bit by adding things like Tuskens pushing boulders down on you, a few wooden bridges here and there, some tents and Tusken structures, and, well, that's just about it. But hey, you do get to kill a lot of Tusken Raiders, so that's a plus. At the end of the canyon, Obi-Wan finds the Queen being held hostage by a Tusken war chieftain who then acts as a boss battle for the player to overcome. Funny how Obi-Wan never mentioned any of this to Qui-Gon.
Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan.
The Tusken Chief himself is a fairly amusing boss battle, albeit a simple one. You can pretty much barrel roll around him the whole time, and the AI isn't smart enough to compensate. Is this the Dark Souls of Star Wars games?
I have defeated your war chief. Allow me to return to my ship safely with the Queen.
Incredible delivery. After that, we're taken back to the Saber Arena again to fight Master Mace Windu himself in a 1v1 duel, and again, he's no different than any other melee character we fight beyond having more health and the force push ability. If you're quick on the parry, then you'll crush him pretty easily.
Take a seat, young.
These final missions put us back on Naboo for the final battle of Theed, as Obi-Wan is tasked with infiltrating the city by himself to find and free a bunch of Naboo pilots, and I do like fighting across this environment in a nighttime setting. We don't get to see Naboo at night super often, so I think that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, however, the game gets a bit more difficult across this mission and the next one, with this one being the hardest in the game, I felt like. There's literally just so many enemies to deal with here that it becomes a challenge to avoid taking immense amounts of damage while dealing with the droid assailants. The game is never really super difficult to deal with like Bounty Hunter was, but this is about as challenging as it gets. After freeing the pilots, we have to fight our way to a massive turbo laser cannon and disable it so it doesn't knock any of our N1 starfighters out of the sky while they're taking off. You know, just like that part in the movie when Obi-Wan destroyed the turbo laser so the N1s weren't shot. Okay, well, I guess the game is giving us more of a what-if situation here then. Again, this level and the next two are all fine. The game definitely shines at the start and end, but it's the middle chapters that really weigh the whole experience down the most. The penultimate level of the game sees us fighting through a horde of droids while cutting the power to a series of doors to keep the droids out, and it's pretty fun. It's a very short, sweet, and simple level, and we do get the opportunity to really enjoy the gameplay here. It's really all just filler to lead us into the main event. The fated duel with Darth Maul, and he's never looked worse. Seriously, why are his eyes facing different directions? You alright there, man? It's got a cool start here as the mission opens on the iconic Duel of Fates music in the background as we're forced behind a red force field where we watch Qui-Gon be killed while we're helpless to do anything about it. Then we jump into the final battle, and you'll recall how I've been bringing up that every one of those saber duels is basically the exact same battle over and over again, and well, this is pretty much the same thing. Once you learn the parry move, there's nothing to it. Every fight is identical, even with his double-bladed lightsaber, it doesn't really make a difference. Instead of the move we see him pull off in the film, Obi-Wan just cuts him in half and force pushes his parts into the pit. It's a bit anticlimactic, but there it is. I know you might be thinking, that's the end of the game, but it's actually not. One final level is opened up for us to go back to the Saber Arena once more and battle it out with every one of the Jedi Masters from the Council, which is kind of cool, I guess. I just kind of ran around and waited for them to kill each other for the most part, but still a cool little bonus level to unlock here. Something I found incredibly strange about this game is that when you beat it, after the final cutscene where Obi-Wan and Anakin are boarding the Queen's ship for some reason... Wait, no, seriously, why are they boarding the Queen's ship right here? That thing's not going back to Coruscant, guys. The rest of the Jedi Council came to Naboo with their own ship to take you home. You're boarding the wrong ship.
How embarrassing.
And why is Chewbacca there? Anyway, after this cutscene plays and the credits end, we're given a final monologue from Obi-Wan as he delivers a series of very strange lines.
Choose the Force. Choose a job. Choose the dark side. Choose the Council. Choose a flubbing big lightsaber.
Some of you may already know what this is, but for those of you who don't, it's a line-for-line parody of the opening monologue from the movie Trainspotting, I assume because it starred Obi-Wan's real-life actor Ewan McGregor as the lead. The thing that I find so strange about its inclusion here is that this game is clearly made for kids. Like, that's the vast majority of who is going to be playing this game, and Trainspotting is an incredibly adult film, which means 90% of the people who ever even saw this Easter egg would have had no idea what it was supposed to be. Not really a problem or anything, I mean it's a fun little Easter egg, but it does further my wondering what the hell was going on in the making of this game. There's not a lot going on in the game itself, admittedly, and even really taking your time with it will only net you around 6 hours of playtime from a playthrough. The story is obviously nothing special either, given it's one of like half a dozen different games that lets you play through some version of the Phantom Menace's events, and the new narrative inclusions like the Black Heth, Jin Ha, and Tusken Chieftain subplots feel half-baked at their best and downright trivial at their worst. The game does have a few cool things to see, like the earlier Coruscant levels, and a lot of fresh perspectives of Theed to play through, but overall what I think most people really remember from this game is the combat. And it is certainly unlike pretty much anything else I've ever played. It's a very ambitious and creative new way of attempting Jedi gameplay where our hero moves with tank controls bound to the left joystick and the direction in which he swings his lightsaber is bound to the right joystick. This is actually really cool, and although it did take me a while to get the hang of it, I was starting to see the vision here a little over halfway through the game. Swinging right, left, or overhead based on the position of your enemy is pretty satisfying overall, and transitioned well between fighting ranged enemies and dueling melee ones. Holding down the left trigger to utilize your force powers, you can increase the damage dealt by these moves and even see a more powerful looking swing animation performed. Pushing down on the right joystick initiates a block that you can time to either deflect blaster shots back into your enemies or parry oncoming melee attacks. And of course, being a Jedi, we have some force powers at our disposal and the ability to force push enemies, grab and throw objects, disarm enemies from a distance, force jump for platforming in combat, and a lightsaber throw. There's also a slow motion ability kind of like bullet time, which is pretty cool. I didn't really use it though. It's not much compared to the plethora of unique force powers we'd already seen in other games like Dark Forces 2 at the time, but it was enough to flesh out combat encounters and really hammer home feeling like a Jedi. Then of course, you can't leave out one of the most iconic things about this game: the infinite handspring technique.
I'm not sure.
Star Wars Obi-Wan features two ways to dodge incoming attacks: a traditional barrel roll style move programmed to your X button, and two acrobatic moves programmed to your O button. Hitting the acrobatic button moving left or right will cause Obi-Wan to do a cartwheel in either direction, but holding forward or back will make him perform a front or back handspring. Thing is, you can hold the button and just do it forever. He literally won't stop. He'll just go like a Jedi cheerleader in an underdog movie from the early 2000s. I think the intention here was that the dodge roll is more useful for avoiding blaster fire while trying to run for cover or close a gap, and the acrobatic stuff was intended for melee combat to help you cartwheel around and handspring away from your opponent during a duel. In practice though, neither button ever feels particularly useful in any scenario, but it's still fun to mess around with, I guess. When you put all of that together, I do believe it's a genuinely fun time. For like an hour. The truth is that once you've played through one or two chapters, it starts to get kinda old. The majority of every level is spent running through long stretches of hallways or barren landscapes, and when you get to have enemy encounters, they all feel the exact same because another major problem this game has is a complete lack of enemy variation. You have one melee enemy that gets reskinned depending on the level and given more HP when it's used as the boss, one ranged enemy that shoots at you with blasters, and that's pretty much it for 95% of your gameplay. Occasionally, you'll fight something a little different, like these exploder droids that try to close the distance and blow you up, or the grenadier enemies who toss grenades at you, or even the flame droids and Tuskens that shoot out flames at you, obviously. But there's honestly not a lot of these across the game, and they're kind of annoying to deal with anyway. I did really like fighting the vulture droids. They were some of my favorites, but they almost never show up. I think we only see them in like 3 places in total, and they're not mini bosses or anything. They're just slightly stronger than the other enemies. I'm kind of struggling to explain why this game felt like a bit of a slog, because on paper, every game is just moving from one environment to another and fighting enemies along the way, and similar games I loved like Jedi Outcast or Academy or even Dark Forces 2 had pretty much the same amount of enemy types and even a similarly structured progression, which is why I feel like so much of it might be the issue of the game just not being completed or polished. Because on paper, this game is fine, but in execution, it ends up feeling like a slog at times, and I attribute a lot of that to the level design as well. By all accounts, Star Wars Obi-Wan could be really good.
But it isn't.
With all of the remasters of old Star Wars games we've been getting lately, I of course have to give my thoughts on if I think Aspyr should go back, touch this game up, and bring it to modern hardware. They did do Bounty Hunter after all, and I even said myself that this game is kinda like the spiritual predecessor to that one. And with how I've been speaking about Obi-Wan so far, it might seem like I don't think it'd be worth their time to revisit, but it's quite the opposite actually. I would love to see an Obi-Wan remaster get released on modern platforms, particularly Steam. It's not a great game, yeah, but neither was Jedi Power Battles, and I loved playing the remaster of that. Well, kind of anyway. I'd really like to have it in my Steam library too, and for content I'd probably try to 100% the achievements, which sounds gruelingly fun. Not to mention I hate when old games are super inaccessible for people to play, and outside of analog hardware, you can't really play this game the way it deserves to be played. Sure, it is emulatable, like I've proven here, but the lighting problems, graphical issues, and constant crashes do make it a less enjoyable experience than it otherwise would be. Besides, you could easily get away with bundling this one with Bounty Hunter for running sales, given the similarities. Also, there is a multiplayer in this game, by the way, and it's literally a good time waiting to happen. There's not much to it, but it's still a neat thing to have some fun with for a few hours. I mean, come on, it really does have a certain charm to it.
down and get to the bottom of this.
I'm not sure.
They've escaped from the conference room.
This has been a hard one for me to break down, because there's parts of it I really like, and there's other parts I very much don't, and overall it's not a very good experience to play. I actually really do hope this one gets remastered, because it could use some polish, and the core combat system is so cool that I'd love to see what would happen if modders got their hands on it via a PC port. Otherwise, playing this game is such an odd experience. It's got a weird narrative that feels like nothing is happening half the time, that just randomly interweaves itself with the Phantom Menace's plot here and there while literally just making up the other half of what the player will be doing throughout. Between the wonky voice acting, inconsistent level design, seemingly directionless flow, and perhaps most importantly, the lack of polish, Star Wars Obi-Wan is just a mess. I think there's a reason you don't see a lot of people talking about this game, and it's not just because it was an Xbox exclusive. If you loved this game growing up, believe me, I get it. There's no chance I wouldn't have put 15 to 20 hours into this game as a kid, replaying it and just enjoying the fact that it was Star Wars and I was playing as Obi-Wan. But experiencing it without the benefit of nostalgia made it a far tougher pill to swallow, especially since I wanted to like it. I remember seeing it on Blockbuster shelves as a kid, lamenting that I couldn't play it because I didn't have an Xbox at the time. For those of you who actually know what Blockbuster is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe we'll see an Obi-Wan remaster hitting modern platforms at some point, and if such time comes, you can bet I'll be pining to make a review of it. Until then, however, unless you're looking to relive some nostalgia or are a particularly big Obi-Wan Kenobi fan, there's quite a few far better Star Wars games for you to play instead.
Sleeping on the job already, eh?
I'm sorry.
Developed and published in-house by LucasArts, Star Wars Starfighter is a vehicle-based action game set during the events of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and tells the tie-in side story of an unlikely band of heroes who aided in the fight against the Trade Federation's occupation of the planet Naboo. Now, when this game was released back in February of 2001, it was sort of breaking new ground by being the first Star Wars game to launch on the Sony PlayStation 2, which had only been out for roughly a year at the time. I feel like it's often compared to its N64 counterpart, Battle for Naboo, which launched on the Nintendo 64 less than 2 months earlier, and I mean, the comparisons are understandable. Both games take place at roughly the exact same time in the chronology, they're both centered primarily around this same exact event, and both lean heavily on the iconic N1 Starfighter for their marketing. Not to mention sharing different versions of the exact same final battle. Those things aside, however, the two stories are vastly different, with Starfighter featuring multiple protagonists across multiple different planets and far better space battles compared to Battle for Naboo, which, to be fair, is focused almost entirely on in-atmosphere and ground battles and never leaves the planet Naboo. Also, Starfighter looks and controls significantly better.
What do you have in mind?
Although it initially only released for the PS2, Starfighter was eventually ported to the Microsoft Xbox roughly 10 months later, and then to the PC another 2 months after that. There was also an arcade cabinet designed for a specific smaller version of this game with less missions, and it's apparently extremely rare, so if you've ever seen one of these, consider yourself lucky. As for the PC and Xbox ports, both were handled by a studio called Secret Level Inc., and although the PC version was a straight-up port of the PS2 version with no real changes, the Xbox version is a little different. Rather than just port the game straight to the Xbox, Secret Level decided to include a number of improvements and new features, such as several new bonus missions, unlockable alternative vehicles to play in the campaign, improved graphics and fidelity, and even several additional two-player modes and bonus missions as well. They then rebranded it as Star Wars Starfighter Special Edition as an acknowledgement of its improvements and additional features, and likely a reference to the special edition versions of the original trilogy released a few years earlier. So with that in mind, I obviously opted to use the Xbox version of the game to record my footage so I could talk about the bonus content, but also it does genuinely look better than the PS2 version. As for the PC version, it was released a full 2 months after the special edition, so I'm not really sure why they decided to port the PS2 version of the game over instead of the clearly superior Xbox Special Edition.
Here I am about to flush your body out and strip your motor down for parts. You got a nice ship. Hey, back off!
What's even crazier is that the PC version has basically no mod support or even a stable widescreen fix. So although I would assume that it has the potential to be the optimal version, right now it just isn't. which is a shame since it is readily available on Steam for purchase, but again, it's not even the better version of the game and isn't well optimized at that. As of making this video, I've heard nothing about any kind of remaster for this game, but given how Aspyr seems to be cranking out remasters of old Star Wars games, I would hope that they use the special edition as their base instead of the PS2 version or pre-existing PC port if they decide to do one. As for the game we have now, it's pretty straightforward overall. Players are placed in the pilot seat of various different starfighters across 14 playable missions and are tasked with completing a set of objectives to beat each mission. The objectives can vary quite a bit from mission to mission, ranging from disabling freighters to defending friendly bases, but at their core, each of these levels is pretty much the same, and the gameplay itself is just very simple, both in concept and execution. Fly around a designated area, be it in space or in the air, and dogfight against enemy fighters while attempting to complete the aforementioned objectives. Now, across these 14 missions, Starfighter does actually have a unique new story to tell that runs parallel to the events of the Phantom Menace, and features a fresh cast of characters for players to meet and inhabit as they experience the narrative.
Freeze.
Nim. We meet at last.
The story of Star Wars Starfighter follows 3 seemingly unrelated pilots as they each overcome a series of their own challenges before eventually coming together with the common goal of fighting back against the Trade Federation's occupation of Naboo. The first of these characters we as the player are introduced to is Rhys Dallows, a young rookie pilot who only just recently joined the Naboo Royal Space Fighter Corps. Rhys is a homegrown Naboo native born in the capital city of Theed and raised by his school teacher mother. From childhood, Rhys had dreamed of being a pilot, just like his freighter pilot father who went missing during a routine mission and never returned during Rhys's youth. Although he was initially assigned to Echo Flight, where he piloted an NX police cruiser, a fateful battle at Station TFP-9 allowed him to show off what he was capable of, where he helped Bravo Flight fight off a force of pirates. None of this is shown or talked about in the game, by the way, but rather this information comes from The Starfighter Trap, a short story written by Steve Miller to appear in the first issue of the Star Wars Gamer magazine, published by Wizards of the Coast. This short story is really fun and features a number of recognizable characters from the film, such as Rick O'Lee and C.O. Bibble. Okay, well, recognizable for Star Wars fans at least.
The death toll is catastrophic. You must contact me.
Anyway, it's a great story and neatly sets players up for the game's plot. I'll put a link to it in the description if any of you want to read it. The whole thing is only a few pages long, and it's pretty great.
Well, well, the cavalry. What kept you, flyboys?
With his natural talents and clear capabilities on full display, Bravo flight leader Asara Till had Rhys Dallows transferred to Bravo to begin training with the best and taking flight in the iconic N1 Starfighter, which is where the game begins. This first mission is very much a tutorial level both for the player and for Rhys as a character. Asara Till guides the player through this long canyon as she trains him on how to use the N1, and it's during this that the player can familiarize themselves with controlling the ship's various functions as they take out a series of floating mines and then a few squads of holo fighters. I really love how they bothered to model out these holo projectors to explain where the holo fighters are coming from. They didn't need to do this. I doubt most people would have questioned or cared, but this was just loyalty to the immersion and the universe, and these little details matter to me. We get some fun banter between the two pilots before she informs Rhys that his final challenge is to overcome her in a fighter battle to see who can knock out the other's shields first. Of course, being the player character, Rhys wins the duel, and the two fly off to their first mission as Asara welcomes Rhys officially into Bravo Squadron.
So I made it?
Yep. Besides, I need a good partner for the Royal Escort.
And the game treats us right away by throwing the player into a space mission as Asara and Rhys have been assigned as escorts for Queen Amidala. The Queen's presence has been requested by some Trade Federation officials, although I'm not sure what the topic of said meeting was regarding as it isn't stated, but given the strange choice of location for the meeting, Rhys accurately assesses it to be a trap. Before Amidala can board the Trade Federation Lucre Hulk-class battleship, it makes the jump to hyperspace, leaving her stranded in space as a group of mercenary ships show up out of nowhere and begin an assault on her royal starship. This is what the Naboo Royal Space Fighter Corps are trained for, and it's finally time for them to earn their keep as Rhys and Asara fend off the mercenary attack with finesse to buy time for Amidala's ship to make the jump to lightspeed as well. Unfortunately, despite managing to defend the Queen long enough for her to escape, the two pilots are overtaken as Asara is killed and Rhys's starfighter is disabled, leaving him stranded in deep space. Shortly after this, as Reese and his astromech droid Wrench sit derelict in the void, a Toydarian scavenger named Reddy shows up hoping to strip the ship for parts before realizing that there's someone still alive in there. The two interact for a bit before Reddy agrees to give Reese a ride and tow his ship back to safety as they search for Asara, only to find her lifeless body in the cockpit of her Starfighter.
You know her.
Asara.
Sorry.
Man, what a sad way to go. Given the situation, Reddy calls on a friend of his to ask if they can use her base to repair Reese's ship and get him home. She reluctantly agrees after expressing some discontent towards his rank.
Oh, great. Another idealist.
Well, not at the moment.
We then swap perspectives to follow this new character we've just been introduced to. This is Vanna Sage, a freelance mercenary currently under contract for the Trade Federation. Born on Alderaan, Vanna would leave home at only 15 years old to pursue life as a pilot by joining up with the Royal Naboo security forces and serving for several years. Eventually, Vanna left both Naboo and the RNSF out of frustration when her repeated attempts at convincing the Naboo government that they needed more defenses were ignored. So now she lives on her own, working for whomever offers her the most credits for the skill set she built in her time serving on Naboo, and currently, that's the Trade Federation. Here, the third mission of the game depicts Vanna working a troubleshooting job testing out the capabilities of the experimental new Scarab fighters for the Trade Federation. All seems to be going well too, until suddenly Vanna's astromech droid Mod 3 intercepts a transmission that she wasn't supposed to hear about a planned illegal invasion of Naboo. Seemingly caught red-handed, the Trade Federation immediately terminates Vanna's contract and sends both a squad of hunter-killer droids and a band of hired mercenaries to destroy her before she can tell anyone what she heard.
This is your last fight, Vanna. Can't say I'll miss you.
We'll see about that.
After fending off the attackers, Vanna ends up following one of the hunter-seeker droids she didn't destroy down to the nearby volcanic planet of Eos, where she is led to a massive droid manufacturing facility. Now, the thing about Eos is that it's well known to be basically uninhabitable due to the obvious environmental condition, but it's also incredibly mineral dense, making it the perfect place to hide an unsanctioned droid manufacturing facility such as the one you're seeing now. Unfortunately for Vanna, a massive shield bubble comes online shortly after she enters and traps her inside, leaving her with no choice but to fight through a horde of hunter-seeker droids in order to knock out enough shield generator towers to let her escape. That said, it's pretty clear something needs to be done about that factory, and her ship doesn't have enough firepower to handle the job. So Vanna plans to head back to her home base, relink with her old friend Reddy while he helps Reese fix his fighter and bring back her recently acquired new bomber fighter to take care of things here, hopefully for a fat payday.
That's the last time I do business with those guys.
Although things are seldom that simple. Making it back to her home base, Vanna touches her ship down and lands safe and sound to begin planning her next move on Eos when she's come upon by some unfortunate circumstances.
You've got my bomber, that's all I care about.
A well-known Fioran pirate named Nim has been waiting to pay her back for putting him in prison and stealing his Havoc bomber fighter. The two have a brief conversation where she convinces him to spare her life in exchange for some potentially profitable information regarding the droid manufacturing facility she just found out about on Eos. Nim spares her but locks her up long enough to tend to other business with plans to return and figure out more about what she knows.
Come back, you space slug!
The game now puts us in control of this Fioran pirate as we take over the aforementioned business, which turns out to be a piracy attack on a series of Trade Federation freighters to steal their supplies. Dialogue leads us to believe this is the big one, a massive pirate raid primed to offer their biggest payday yet. And not only that, but it'll be passing right over the very planet where their home base is, making this too good an opportunity to pass up. Now, at a glance, this might seem like a small subplot side quest to act as filler for the game and introduce us to the pirate character Nim, but knowing what I know about the old EU lore, this is actually one of the most profound missions in the game. Although both this mission and the next two after it have little to nothing to do with the game's main story, in an implicative way, it has everything to do with the entire plot of the Phantom Menace itself. What we're doing here while playing as Nim is leading our ragtag group of pirates as we pillage an entire fleet of Trade Federation supply freighters, which, as you can guess by the name alone, means these supplies were on their way to a destination to be, well, traded. Depending on just how much of a geek you are, you may have read a novel by James Luceno called Star Wars Cloak of Deception that takes place just under a year before the events of the Phantom Menace, and subsequently, also this game. In that book, we're given some immense insight into why the Trade Federation occupied Naboo, why it's important that Naboo signs a treaty with them, why they have their own droid army, and what it took to make them desperate enough to begin working with Darth Sidious, aka Palpatine, to begin with. Cloak of Deception is one of my favorite Star Wars novels, and probably one of the best in general, so if you ever wondered exactly what was going on in that movie, or just wanted some extra Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan story, then I heavily recommend reading it.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
I won't exhaust you with all the details, but in essence, the Trade Federation has been begging the Galactic Republic for legal permission to have its own military to protect itself because their supply runs have been getting completely pillaged by pirate mans across the Outer Rim. These pleas fall repeatedly on deaf ears as the Galactic Republic not only refuses to provide sufficient protection for their supply freighters, but also repeatedly deny them the right to protect themselves with their own military, all the while promising to find an adequate solution while over and over delaying and achieving practically nothing while more and more Trade Federation freighters are stripped, stolen, or destroyed. In the book, we learn this predicament and its long delays in resolution are being cleverly created by Palpatine himself as he advises Chancellor Valorum in ways that ensure little is done to relieve the burden the Trade Federation faces, which results in meeting with them as his alter ego and promising them an alternate solution.
I will make it legal.
What you're seeing here, what you as the player would be doing here, is literally part of the whole problem. Repeated attacks on Trade Federation supply runs like this are what caused them to desperately begin illegal production on their droid army in an effort to defend themselves from pirate raids like Nim and his gang are doing here. After a hard-fought space battle, the supply super freighter goes crashing down towards the planet Locke, where Nim and his gang of pirates chase it down to the planet's surface to steal the cargo.
Come on, it's payday.
This mission is relatively simple. The goal is to protect Nim's cargo freighter and his pirate crew while they strip the downed Trade Federation super freighter of its cargo. Like I pointed out before, this planet is called Locke, and it's another barren world, although notably more habitable than Eos was, as you can tell. It's mostly desert with a variety of mountain ranges across its surface with massive oceans of pure sulfur flowing through various rivers, some of which we can actually see from here. Both this mission and the next one will be taking place on Locke, but for now we fight back the pursuing forces trying to reclaim the lost cargo that Nim's pirate gang quickly loads aboard their own freighter before escaping into some underground catacombs where they disappear for a while before taking the loot back to their base. As it turns out, however, the Trade Federation isn't taking these raids lying down anymore, and this particular big raid turned out to be predictably too good to be true, as in it was a trap so they could track these pirates down to their home base and kill them all for good.
Scout 21.5, please maneuver to assist. Are you there, Dapri?
Well, there they are, and they're very unhappy. This is another simple defense mission where the player, still in control of the pirate Nim, will be defending his pirate base while the people in it completely evacuate. It'll be a lot of destroying freighters, tanks, and bombers, and if you miss too many or aren't fast enough, then they'll destroy too much of your base and you'll fail the mission. If you hold them off long enough, however, your people will make it out alive and set a self-destruct sequence on the base, destroying everything left along with the invading forces. In the meantime, however, we're taken back to Vanna's base where we see Reddy and Reese arriving to make the repairs to his ship.
Well, a ship is here, but where's Vanna?
What's that?
Well, well, the cavalry.
They, of course, find Vanna trapped in the cell Nim left her in before freeing her as she helps Reese repair his N1 Starfighter. The two then discuss the factory she found on Eos as they begin to formulate a plan to destroy it before it can send even more droids after Naboo. Just then, Nim returns to Vanna's base as he promised, only to find her having gotten out of her cell. He admits to her that she was right all along about the Trade Federation and that they wiped out his base. This leads her to introducing Nim to Reese and Reddy, with weapons drawn of course, before offering to let him in on the plan they're working on to destroy the droid factory.
You and whose army?
Yours.
This puts us back in control of Reese again, where we're flying the N1 into another space battle along with Nim, Vanna, and Reddy, with the goal of taking out the orbital satellites and TF freighters to prep for the assault on the factory. although players will need to watch out for the orbital cannon taking shots at them from the planet's surface. This is roughly halfway through the game, so players will probably be familiar enough with how to play by this point. From here on out, it's all about just enjoying the game for what it has to offer, although it does bring to mind my one real criticism. Each mission in Starfighter has a multitude of objectives for the player to complete, both mandatory and optional, but the primary ones are often either attention demanding or time sensitive, which means you pretty much never get the chance to do any regular Starfighter dogfighting. I mean, everything is there for it, and you certainly can just get sidetracked to fight other fighters, but a lot of times this would quickly result in a mission failure because something I was supposed to be defending got blown up, or something I was supposed to be destroying got away. It's a minor criticism, all things considered, but a lot of the time what you're supposed to be doing is pouring laser fire into a bullet sponge object until it dies, which gets a little old after a while.
Try not to get killed.
We're trying. Now go!
After taking out the orbital defenses, the game puts us back into Nim's perspective as he and Vanna stage a full-on assault against the droid factory. A mission that is actually relatively difficult. There's turrets everywhere, and after Vanna took out the shield generator, they doubled down on their defenses, so there's a lot more scarab fighters to deal with than before. Although it's cool that we finally get to take on this factory that's been such a plot point so far. Destroying this thing should help mitigate the amount of droids planned for the Naboo invasion, too. All of this is going down between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan saving Amidala and then returning from Coruscant, just to give you a frame of reference for when this is happening. There's a series of buildings and structures like a landing pad, power station, command center, etc., and we have to track them all down and destroy them with Nim's bomber. Blowing up whole structures like this was actually quite the spectacle back then. I mean, this wasn't just cool for Star Wars fans, but sci-fi and flight sim fans in general. Not saying this game is a flight sim by any means, but you get what I'm saying. With the droid factory in ruins, our ragtag group of warriors has dealt a crippling blow to the Trade Federation's army, and we even get a really cool cutscene of the factory exploding before the crew punches it to Naboo to find the entire planet under a blockade.
Alright then boys, follow my lead.
Back in control of Vanna and her guardian Mantis, we push through a squad of droid starfighters as we fly to face the blockade.
I'll try spinning, that's a good trick.
The objective is to disable the shields on one of those freighters so Reddy can board it and steal a handful of their munitions to deliver to the Naboo resistance on the planet's surface. While Reddy does his plundering, it's up to us to blow the remaining freighters into scraps and ashes. This is probably the best space battle in the game, honestly. I mean, it's not annoyingly demanding, and it's one of the only missions you can kinda take your time and enjoy the game's combat against other starfighters in a satisfying way. The scale is massive, there's a multitude of freighters to destroy, not to mention a handful of missile frigates to take out. Once they're done punching a hole through the blockade, having captured a solid amount of munitions, our heroes head down to the surface to drop off the supplies they just stole. Back on old Naboo again, the game has us fly through the canyon from the tutorial level again, only this time it's loaded with droids trying to kill us, which adds a new dynamic to a familiar level.
Follow me, I remember this place.
Just keep me alive, Reese.
I love the chance to fly around in the N1, and this level gives you such a fantastic opportunity to play with the admittedly really solid flight controls. The first time I talked about this game on the channel a while back, this level was the bane of my existence, but it's because I really didn't spend enough time with the game to realize there was a third-person mode that makes some of these levels way easier. I'll talk more about that later. I mean, it doesn't get more simple than this one. We fly through the canyon, take out whatever droids are in our way, defend Reddy, and try not to crash into the canyon wall. Hammering home the gorgeous paradise planet aesthetic of Naboo, this next level is one of the most unique ones in the game. Tasked with playing escort for a group of land speeders, we need to destroy a series of Trade Federation land turrets and an energy barrier so those speeders can break a group of RNSF hostages out of these small prison areas. Reese, Reddy, and a few members of Bravo Flight then follow along the progression of the Salu River to a series of nearby islands referred to as the Europa Islands, where they make a stand to guard the speeders long enough for the speeders to hit land and get picked up by a shuttle. While all of this is going on, we swap perspectives to see what Vanna and Nim are doing in the meantime. And it happens to be a climactic aerial battle across the great grass plains of Naboo, while the final showdown between the Gungans and droids we see in the film is taking place. Despite this looking a lot like the battle we see in the film, where the droid invasion force battles the Grand Gungan army due to the massive shield, it's actually not. There were 3 droid strike forces on Naboo, and the one from the film was simply the largest one. This one is a smaller shield put up to guard the Resistance outpost the RNSF Resistance has been forming across both this game and, if I'm not mistaken, the Battle for Naboo game as well. They were striving for a lot of consistency in the early prequel days, and it was great. All the player really needs to do is fly around and bomb a bunch of tanks and ships. After a few minutes, Reese and Reddy do come flying in from the last mission to help out, which adds a lot of immersion to the level. Given what the game is, I think this is a really solid penultimate mission and makes a great treat for fans of the film to dig in and enjoy. Of course, you can probably guess that the final level sees us taking control of Reese again as we fly the N1 into space to join the rest of the squad in one final assault on the Lucrehulk class battleship.
Welcome back, Bravo 10. Who trained you?
Asara Till.
Who? I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
I was trained by the best, sir.
Well, we'll make them proud, pilot.
I will, sir. I will.
I mean, this final battle is outright iconic. Even though this isn't the first game to let us play a version of this space battle, it's still a great finale for this story. And the level itself is admittedly fun to play, though albeit with some annoyances. These red explosives that act a lot like the seismic charges from the second film, except of course being red, are insanely frustrating to deal with, and the mission throws them at you constantly. Interestingly though, they bring in the mercenary ship that killed Asara in the second level in a kind of duel-like showdown for Reese to enact justice for him killing his mentor. It's a little over the top, but very in line with Star Wars, so I won't pretend that I don't enjoy it. Eventually, the game takes us inside of the control ship where the final battle between Reese and the mercenary leader takes place, and we get to knock out the shield generator from the inside. I don't love this, to be honest. I see what they were going for, letting players experience the iconic Anakin sequence, but I mean, when Anakin did it, there was a sense of destiny to it, like no one else but him could have done something like that. You know, being the Force-sensitive chosen one and all. There must have been a better way to end this final battle other than ripping off the film's finale, right? Either way, it's what we got, and Reese kills his enemy, knocks out the shield generator, and escapes the ship before Anakin does his thing.
Now this is pod racing.
And Reese comes flying out of the thing triumphantly as if he was the one that blew it up, even though we all know he wasn't. It's a little silly, but still, I see its merits. The final cutscene shows Vanna and Nem having a conversation in a hangar as the ending celebration from the film takes place down on the streets, which I love seeing a different angle of that ending, actually. Reese and Reddy show up to join them as they all discuss parting ways. Reese, Reddy, and Vanna opt to stay on Naboo and continue to serve there, but Nem leaves to return to his life as a pirate captain. And with that, the credits roll. I mean, for a story in a vehicular combat game that will last you no more than 4 hours before seeing the end, I think this is surprisingly competent. The characters are all dynamic, interesting, and unique from one another. Each has their own motivations and personality traits, and despite the fact that this is clearly a tie-in game with the first film, the majority of its plot is still very much its own, and that makes it feel original. This would be the last we ever saw of Reese Dallos, as he doesn't show up again in any EU canon material, although his cut inclusion from the non-canon Star Wars Galaxies MMO leads us to believe that when the Galactic Empire was formed, he went on to join up with the Rebel Alliance. But again, not only is Galaxies not EU canon, but his character's inclusion was cut anyway, so it didn't even happen. As for the rest of the crew, they all have more appearances that I'll cover when I get to them later down the line. For now, let's talk a bit about the gameplay.
What's up, Ugly?
Look who's talking.
For the most part, what you've seen is what you're going to get. Your ship flies forward on its own, but you're in charge of speeding up or slowing down, which allows some degree of versatility regarding movement. Every ship features a similar primary laser fire, but each one has its own unique alternate fire to employ during combat. Depending on which ship you're flying, you'll either have proton torpedoes, proton bombs, or ion-enabled tags. Each of these has their own uses. As for the camera controls, you can switch between a first-person and third-person viewpoint on the fly during gameplay, and despite my initial assumption that this was mainly up to preference, each viewpoint is actually more advantageous than the other depending on what you're doing. When I was playing through the game for the gold medals, on each level I found myself swapping between perspectives to suit the action I was in, such as third person over navigating harsh environments and first person for more precise aiming. And lastly, a mechanic that is super cool in concept but ended up being pretty much useless in execution is the ability to command your allies in combat. You can order them to attack a specific enemy, focus on defense, or just have them regroup on your position. The reason I say it was useless, however, is because when I would tell them to attack a certain target, it would take them 3 times longer to destroy it than it would have taken me. And you better only be telling them to focus on bigger targets because they basically can't deal with destroying individual fighters. It's still a cool system to have, and every once in a while it would work well, but mainly in missions with a lot of larger objects for me to direct their focus towards.
This one goes there, that one goes there, right?
Let's talk a little bit more about the 3 primary ships you'll be flying across the game's campaign. First up, I know I don't need to say much about the N1 Starfighter. You all already know what it is. I mean, I've called it iconic in this video already so far, but let's be real for a second. I think most of us would struggle to find someone we could show a picture of this thing to that wouldn't either know or guess that it's from Star Wars. Manufactured by the Theed Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps, it's considered a luxury starfighter, and as you've seen, it's clearly capable of a lot during combat. As for the second ship we fly, Vanna Sage's Guardian Mantis is one of a kind, and was manufactured by a rogue Z-Char engineer before it wound up in Vanna's hands. The Z-Char are a whole can of worms that I'm not going to get into here, but in a nutshell, they're religious fanatics who worship hard work and engineering like a religion, and they were involved in manufacturing a number of Trade Federation products as well. The notable thing about this fighter, as mentioned earlier, is its ion tag system, which fires off nanotags that disrupt and disable a fighter's deflector shields, and act as a homing beacon for the Mantis's nanomissiles. Lastly, Nim's pride and joy, the Havoc, is a heavily modified Skurg H-6 bomber, armed with not only its primary laser cannons, but also 2 additional self-operated rotating laser cannons to fend off other fighters from all directions. Not to mention it's been outfitted with its own hyperdrive, which does make sense given that it's quite a bit bigger than your average fighter. In fact, pre-modifications, it was intended to require 5 crew members to operate, but Nim ensured with some heavy alterations that he could run it by himself with the aid of 2 astromech droids. And with these 3 fighters, players will take on the Trade Federation across the game's 14 available missions.
Come on, live dangerously.
At the end of each mission, we're treated to a results screen where we can observe how we performed, see what we missed, and decide if we want to go back in to do better. You'll notice that these screens show a medal system with rankings of bronze, silver, and gold. You can consider a mission complete and move on to the next one just by achieving the primary objectives, but in order to achieve higher medals, you'll need to complete each bonus objective as well. Doing so isn't just for bragging rights either, as this is the way players can unlock the game's various bonus missions, and the main reason I opted to use the Xbox version for my footage. Although I did think these bonus missions were fun, there's really not much here that we haven't seen in the single player mode already at this point. The first bonus mission is called Fighter Training and sees us back in the N1 as Reese fends off a few waves of holo fighters for practice. The second is called Ground Attack Training, where we're once again fighting waves of holographic enemies, only this time as Nim and in atmosphere as opposed to in space. The third bonus mission is where we finally get something unique. It's called Charm's Way and takes us way back to before the invasion of Naboo began, as we get to play as Asara Till for the first time. As Asara, we have to defend a convoy of merchant ships as they depart from Naboo and are set upon by a series of pirates hoping to pillage them. One of these ships is called the Charm's Way and is piloted by none other than Reeve Dallows, father of Reese Dallows.
Reese Dallows, Bravo Flight.
So clean cut.
Asara defends the ships until they can make the jump to lightspeed, but as I mentioned way earlier, Reeve would not return from this journey, so it's kind of a dark mission knowing that, but it's cool that Reese's father even got to make an appearance at all. This is really the most intriguing of the available bonus missions narrative-wise, and is kind of like a retroactive prologue to the main game in a way. The fourth bonus mission, called Canyon Spirit, just puts us back in the tutorial level canyon again as we take control of Reese in a non-canonical race against the other protagonists from the game. The fifth one, Outpost Attack, returns us to Vanna's perspective again as she defends a mining outpost against a Trade Federation attack. I'm not sure where in the timeline this takes place, but I'm going to assume it's after the main game. Waves of starfighters will come down and attack the outpost, and the player has to defend it to complete the mission. And lastly, Space Sweep is an arcade-like minigame where we play as Nim again and destroy as many asteroids as we can to rack up a high score. It's a neat little addition that makes the game feel all that much more as though it was made with passion. These little details like this didn't have to be there, but the devs just wanted to have fun extra content for players to enjoy, and I can appreciate that.
You ever get sick of working in paradise? You know who to call.
Now normally this is where it ends. If you're playing the PS2 or PC versions of the game, that's all there is to offer here. But the Xbox Special Edition comes in clutch with 2 more bonus modes for players to engage with. The first of these is called Droid Hunt, and puts us back with Vanna again as she flies back to Eos to check on the factory they destroyed, only to find it being put back together by a series of mining droids they left behind before. Here the player has to fly around the map and collect each of these mining droids in order to complete the mission. I personally headcanon this as happening after the Outpost Attack bonus mission, where Vanna wonders where the droids came from to attack said outpost and goes out to investigate the factory on a hunch. And lastly, the final bonus mission is called Serious Swarm, and is easily the most excessive of any level in the game. To give you an idea of why I say that, there's a bonus objective for beating it in under 30 minutes. We take control of Reese one last time as literal waves of enemies descend upon him one after another. Probably the most notable thing about this mission is that we finally get to destroy one of these landers, which I kept trying to do in the main campaign to no avail since I think they're indestructible there. Either that or I wasn't patient enough. But here we get to blow one of them up and it's very satisfying. Also, Darth Maul's Sith infiltrator comes flying in, controlled by the mercenary leader from the end of the last campaign mission, and we have to blow him up, which makes me think this is probably all just a dream sequence in Reese's head. Either way, it's for sure the longest level in the game, and a fun inclusion for the special edition overall.
I'll see you later. Maybe.
The last of the extra bonuses are 4 2-player versions of the single-player levels we've already gone over, those being Droid Hunt, Charm's Way, Canyon Race, and a different 2-player version of that called Night Canyon, where it's a 1v1 race. And lastly, if you get all of the gold medals across every campaign mission, you'll have unlocked the ability to replay any mission in a variety of vehicles that we otherwise wouldn't get to use, including Ready Zoomer, a Scarab Fighter, the Police Cruiser, and the Sith Infiltrator. I mean, they went the extra mile here for a bonus unlockable that probably less than half of everyone who owned this game ever even saw. Look, they gave the thing its own unique heads-up display, and of course, it's one of the best ships in the game. Seriously, flying around in this thing is exactly as fun as it looks. The Police Cruiser is another really cool vehicle that I appreciated being included here. It's only accessible through a cheat code input, but it still feels even more connected to the EU with its addition. Now before we wrap up, this game is a little bit known for being totally jam-packed with secrets and Easter eggs, and as such, I figured I'd bring in another expert who I know is a huge fan of the game to talk about it. Flandrew, what can you tell us about the secrets hiding within Star Wars Starfighter?
Thank you, Evan. Like most LucasArts games of the time, Starfighter was filled with Easter eggs. From concept art galleries and bizarre developer Christmas messages, to this battle droid casually grilling some sausages on top of an asteroid. But the game's best Easter egg is one I found accidentally when I was 9. Starfighter was the first PlayStation 2 game I ever got, and the first game I ever played that utilized both analog sticks. So naturally I was terrible at it, smashing my poor N1 all around the Naboo canyons. At one point I had accidentally sent the Starfighter heading in the wrong direction to the start of the trench, and that's when I saw it. An area made up of shield generator walls, and once I flew through the ring I was able to go up and see a bunch of random paintings floating in the air. At the time, I didn't know what they were. In fact, for a while I thought I dreamt the whole thing up. But sure enough, it's real. The paintings are actually artwork from the LucasArts game Outlaws, which was released a few years prior to Starfighter. So there you have it, kids. Sometimes incompetence and stupidity can unlock amazing things. Back to you, Evan.
Thanks so much for coming on board, Flandrew. I've been a fan of his content for a while now, and it was really cool to get to work with him on this. Cheers, man. As for Star Wars Starfighter, I think my feelings on this game have been made pretty clear by this point. It's admittedly limited, yes, and you can probably 100% the thing and have nothing left to do in roughly 8 hours, which is really pushing it on the content side of things. If I had bought this game for its $50 price tag back in the day, I'd probably be a bit harsher on it. But even with that said, the game is still really high quality for a PS2 game from 2001. I mean, it's just so much fun to play. And it's not like this game is coming off of anything that set some kind of major precedent either. I mean, it was the first Star Wars game on the PS2, and the devs were working with new tech. Honestly, the majority of LucasArts titles tended to be pretty short most of the time anyway. What we get when we jump into Star Wars Starfighter is a tight-knit and satisfying experience with a fun tie-in story that adds a lot of depth and intrigue to the first film's plot, while introducing us to new characters and locations that we hadn't seen before, but that still compels us all the same. I'm confident in saying that even after all of these years, Star Wars Starfighter is still a must-play for any and all fans of the series.
What a team!
Released in December of the year 2000 for the N64, and later in March for the PC as well, this Episode 1 tie-in is a pretty interesting one. There are several really good tie-in games for Episode 1, one of which we've looked at already in the form of Star Wars Starfighter, a game that's actually kinda similar to this one in a few ways, which we'll get to. And this was actually the second game to be officially titled with the Episode 1 moniker, the first being Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, a game I'll be covering very soon, but there were several others as well. But what makes this one stand out from the other Episode 1 tie-ins is that it's the only one to attempt a mix of both land vehicle, sea vehicle, and air vehicle missions. That's right, Factor 5 decided to try and expand on potential mission variety by including both land and sea vehicles for this one, which was probably a smart gambit considering the entire game is set on Naboo. Which is another thing that separates this game from its sibling tie-ins, as it's the only one to be set entirely on Naboo with no other locations ever appearing outside of bonus missions. A far cry from its spiritual predecessor, Rogue Squadron, which featured over a dozen different planets across its main campaign. I'll be comparing Battle for Naboo to Rogue Squadron pretty much the whole time. I mean, this game feels more like an expansion pack to Rogue Squadron than a legitimate sequel, honestly, which is why I feel like I'll have to compare. Now, I always like to have a section early on in these videos about if I have any experience with the game I'm talking about prior to my playing it to cover it here. And something I'll say is I didn't know that I did until I played it. When I decided to cover it, I genuinely didn't think I really knew anything about it beyond the title and concept. I don't remember when I played it, and I'm nearly positive I did not ever own it. But upon starting up that first mission, I knew I'd seen it before. I don't remember when or where, but I know that at some point in my childhood I have played this game. I have to tell you, it's a very odd sensation to have a memory triggered that you can't place at all. I recognize the opening level, but don't know when or where from. Aside from that, however, I was really going in blind. Now, believe it or not, after doing some research, this game actually does a lot to both add to and stay faithful to the movie and its canon. Throughout the game, we play as Gavin Sykes, which is spelled like a 2008 MySpace Screamo artist. Gavin is a lieutenant of the Royal Naboo Security Force, much like Riz Dallos from Star Wars Starfighter. Unlike Riz, however, Gavin actually plays a substantial role in other Star Wars media. Well, the Legends media, not so much the Disney media, because they threw away thousands of hours of people's work and passion from across multiple decades to replace it with their own canon. But back in the Legends media, we can see just how prominent our boy Gavin was. Not only was he actually in the Phantom Menace, but he also shows up in Galactic Battlegrounds, Star Wars Galaxies, and even the aforementioned Star Wars Starfighter, mentioned only as Bravo 6 though. His role is probably the most interesting in Galaxies, where he played a prominent role during the Galactic Civil War, even helping to stop a deadly bioweapon from being released and killing millions. Here, however, we see his humble origins as a young hotshot thrust into the throes of a droid invasion. Just like in Rogue Squadron, Factor 5 and LucasArts have teamed up to give us a wholly original story that coincides with the movie directly. And while it's a little less complicated than Rogue Squadron, I feel it has a lot to add to your enjoyment of the movie. Starting off, we assume control of Gavin during the fall of Theed, playing as we escape the occupation with our ally, Captain Kale, and try to help out with the countryside citizens of Naboo. From there, the RNSF tries to regroup and formulate some kind of resistance to the ongoing droid occupation. During that time, we save a vessel being attacked by the Trade Federation belonging to Borvo the Hutt, who offers to ally himself with us as repayment for saving his ship. So with added resources and allies, we launch a direct offensive on the Trade Federation to cripple their forces and rescue Naboo hostages which are being used as slaves. But in a twist no one could have seen coming, Borvo outright betrays us, and we have to fight off his forces along with the Trade Federation's occupying force. The first and third acts are dedicated to fighting the Trade Federation, but the second act is mostly given to fighting and defeating Borvo the Hutt and his forces, which ended up being one of the most notable parts of the story for me. They don't know who they're messing with. Gavin Sykes is in Her Majesty's royal service. All of this is what is happening while Padme is on Coruscant pleading to the Galactic Senate for help. When she returns to retake Theed, Sykes and the remaining RNSF forces rally behind her to essentially play out the final events of the movie, even allowing us to play the final assault on Voltan Pala, the big circular droid control ship we see Anakin destroy in the movie. The penultimate level inside of Theed is arguably the most ambitious level between both this and Rogue Squadron, to be honest. It's dense and really detailed. I feel like this game even does better justice to the final battle from the movie than Starfighter did. Even though that one was way better graphically and scale-wise, this one didn't try to make our protagonist more than he was, and we hear Anakin when he comes flying out and see the ship start to blow up. It's a tighter-knit story than most of the other Star Wars games I've seen so far, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't get a kick out of getting to play the events on Naboo we didn't see in the movie between when Padme escaped Naboo and when she returned. Whereas a lot of these games take place vaguely between the events of certain movies, this one can be pinpointed so specifically within the Phantom Menace that it really feels like we're playing a genuine companion piece to the film, even so far as seeing our player character in the movie, which is awesome. Now, I really don't talk about graphics in my videos unless I'm praising them or talking about how good they are. Criticizing something like that isn't my thing, and I don't typically care how bad graphics are if I'm having fun. But I'm happy to point out if the graphics do go above and beyond. This is sort of a special instance though, because the graphics aren't just bad, they look worse than the game they're following up in some cases. Somehow, Battle for Naboo manages to look worse than Rogue Squadron in a lot of ways, despite coming 2 years after. There are some parts of it that look better, like the lighting and maybe the textures. The new particle effects they introduced are really cool, like rain and snow, and the draw distance is way further, which makes things feel more immersive. But the explosions for some reason look way worse, like a green screen preset. They looked similar in Rogue Squadron, but way less apparent for some reason. And the most unforgivable part? What the hell is this? Are you kidding me? Is this really the best they could do? I get 3D was a new technology at the time, but are you telling me they couldn't model a 3D character model for this speeder? This paper thing looks just awful. I'm not alone either, as this was a point of criticism upon the game's release actually. I just don't believe it had to be this way. I really think if they'd wanted to, they could have modeled something here instead of using paper textures. Like, who thought this would be okay? Moving on to the gameplay, you'll see it is very similar to Rogue Squadron, so I'll tell you now, if you like Rogue Squadron or if this gameplay looks fun to you, then you'll probably like this game. It's that simple. That being said, although this game takes place exclusively on or around Naboo, don't be fooled into thinking that the environments aren't varied. Between the multiple different vehicles we have, 3 different biomes we get to see, and the inclusion of space battles, which were notably absent from Rogue Squadron, Battle for Naboo might actually be more varied than its predecessor. Although we mostly see the standard fare beautiful paradise planet aesthetic of Naboo, across a few levels we do get to see snow, a swamp, and of course space. So it's varied enough, especially when you take into account that you'll be switching between land, sea, and air vehicles across these levels. One very impressive new feature is that some levels have hangars where you can swap seamlessly between land or air vehicles during the mission, which is pretty awesome, honestly. And it's a feature that pays off as they use it several times to take you straight from dogfighting in the air to a totally different style of vehicle combat. We already know the aerial gameplay is gold. I covered that in the Rogue Squadron video. So what about the new ground and water combat? Well, the ground combat is awesome. Each time I got to do it, I was thrilled and had a blast. There's really only 3 vehicles to choose from between 2 speeders and a staff, at least by default, with a very clear hierarchy of which one is better than the other. But all 3 of them are very fun to play with. As for the sea-based combat, I won't sugarcoat it, it sucks. Like, it's bad. The most offensive issue is that the aiming straight up doesn't work, and auto-aim can't save it. The default aim is like an inch too high to shoot anything in front of you, and a few inches too low to take out turrets positioned above you. It's really an awful experience. There's only one boat to control, and it doesn't even look cool to play. The whole dynamic is terrible, and it damages the experience overall. Fortunately, I think there's only 2 missions where you're in this thing, and only one of them where you're in it for the whole mission, so it's not too bad. There's pretty much the same number of missions as Rogue Squadron, but several of them feel way shorter, so I think I completed this game faster than when I played Rogue Squadron, but let me tell you, it's, for some strange reason, way harder. I don't know why, but they upped the difficulty or something, because about halfway through it, it gets insanely hard to avoid taking damage. So just be aware of that if you're planning to go play it. Now earlier, I said the game takes place mostly on Naboo. That's because just like Rogue Squadron, we have a few bonus levels to look at. There's 3 bonus levels to unlock, and there are a number of cool little secrets you can find across the levels, or cheats to try if you're inclined. The first of the levels is pretty bland, I feel. You're protecting a Republic transport as it leaves with a bunch of files from a Trade Federation base. It's not very noteworthy, I feel. The second 2 are where it's at. Coruscant encounter has us flying through the high-rise streets of the city planet, chasing Darth Maul's Sith infiltrator as we attempt to shoot him down. It's pretty insane, but really fun. Makes me wonder, how have we not gotten more modern games that let us fly through the streets of Coruscant like this before now? Then, the last hidden mission is probably the coolest. We get to control Darth Maul and his Sith infiltrator as we cut through dozens of Naboo forces, destroy farms and buildings, leaving this Naboo countryside in burning ashes, which, after spending so many levels trying to keep these things safe, is admittedly a little cathartic. All in all, some very unique and fun extras that probably made trying to get those gold and silver medals all the more worth it back in the day. Earlier on the channel, I did a video on the Starfighter games, and something a lot of you may notice is that there are some striking similarities between this and Star Wars Starfighter, but let me assure you, they're very different games. There were more characters in Starfighter, and there was a much stronger attempt at a real story, even taking the player away from Naboo for most of the game, but it ended up just feeling strange and out of place to me, and I don't think the multiple perspective jumps to different characters helped either. In Battle for Naboo, the story may not look as pretty or have any cutscenes, but it's far more concise, equally as interesting, and we play as the same character from start to finish. Not to mention, you only ever control fighters in Starfighter, naturally. So although the 2 games may look similar and share the N1 Starfighter on the cover, rest assured that they are 2 very different games. As mentioned before, Battle for Naboo has significantly more in common with Rogue Squadron than it does Starfighter. The music was once again handled by Rudolf Stember, but unlike Rogue Squadron, this game really doesn't have a musical identity of its own. Nearly all of the music you'll hear is directly from the movie, although it's been rewritten into Factor 5's Musi-X sound driver so it sounds more video gamey. All of the melodies are very clearly all taken directly from the Phantom Menace, which, to be honest, fits. This game is a side story that takes place directly alongside the events of the movie, so I'm fine that it shares its identity that much closer. It's all great, of course, but I mean, it's John Williams, so stands to reason it would be. The game's reception was unfortunately quite telling. While it received mostly positive reviews, pretty much all of the criticism was aimed at the lack of innovation for gameplay, the lower quality music not holding up to other games on the market at the time, and the graphics. Though they were apparently pretty mixed on those issues from what I read, the game's PC port was significantly less appreciated, being given what amounts to a 5.5 out of 10 average when I looked. Overall, the game has a lot to offer and a very fun package. Star Wars fan or not, this is still one of the better N64 games I've played, and the extra context for the movie's plot was just an added treat for me. I am comfortable saying this one is worth checking out. I feel like it's in the shadow of Rogue Squadron in a lot of people's minds for all kinds of reasons, but make no mistake, it's every bit as exciting and worth playing as Rogue Squadron is.
This scrappy little guy does not go to winning his beer. It's Patron.
Funny story about this one, when I first started the channel, this was one of the games I knew I really wanted to do a video on. I put it off for a while though, checking out some other Star Wars games I was interested in first. Released in May 1999, just 2 days after the Phantom Menace hit theaters, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer is a racing game, obviously, based off of the pod racing sport we see introduced in the movie it was tying into. The game was developed for the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, Microsoft Windows, Macintosh, and the Game Boy Color? I mean, that's basically a different game. There was a PS1 port announced to be in development, but it never saw release, and I couldn't find any information as to why. My guess is the console was nearing the end of its life cycle. Racer was headed up by Star Wars legend John Knowles, and several other prominent developers from LucasArts who had just wrapped up development on Shadows of the Empire when they began working alongside the movie's production crew to try and create a game based on the movie's pod racing concept. Originally, the game was even supposed to be called Star Wars Pod Racer, but apparently some other company owned the trademark for any game with the word pod in the title, so in the end, they settled on just calling it Episode 1 Racer. It's a little strange. I feel like I remember it being called Star Wars Pod Racer, like I've been hit with the Mandela effect or something, because I had this game as a kid on the PC. I can literally remember having this exact case, but for some reason, my brain always thought it said Pod Racer. Either way, I loved this game as a kid. Playing through the new levels and seeing all these new planets was exciting, not to mention all of the bizarre and interesting pod racers we can unlock. For this video, we're looking at the N64 version of the game, which is pretty much the same as the other versions, except just like Shadows of the Empire, all of the pre-rendered cutscenes have been removed. The cartridge just couldn't handle them. Racer has a very typical racing game structure featuring 4 different tournaments to play through, each more difficult than the last, with increasingly challenging environments to navigate and try to race through. Let me just say, the learning curve between the first and second tournament is pretty substantial, and they get harder every new circuit. Really, the only way to keep up with the difficulty spikes is to constantly be upgrading your pod racer or just keep swapping to new vehicles and racers altogether, of which there is a surprisingly eclectic selection. And by that, I mean there's 25 total racers to pick from, 23 unlockable without cheats. That is kind of a lot of pod racers. Among them are some recognizable characters like Anakin or Sebulba, and a bunch of other characters we did see briefly in the first movie, all of which you can play as, and most of which have the same voice actors from the movie, including Anakin, properly voiced by Jake Lloyd. As mentioned earlier, there's a way to upgrade your different pod racers thanks to Watto's shop, where you can buy parts new, or head out back to the junkyard to see if he's got any parts for cheaper. And true to the film, Republic credits are no good here, only money, which in Tatooine terms means their on-planet currency, Trugets. Speaking of Tatooine, the first level of the game takes place there on the Boonta Eve course. Also, there is no narrative or storyline to speak of this time around, because the real star of the show is the different planets and racetracks you'll get to visit and play on. We get to visit 8 different planets across the 4 main circuits, but each time you visit a planet, the track has changed, oftentimes being expanded to be even longer and with more various different paths to take. Seriously, some of the coolest planets aren't even available until you get to the 2nd and 3rd circuits, which in order to progress you'll have to place at least 3rd on every level to see the next course, which, depending on the track, can actually end up being pretty difficult.
Anakin! How many times have I told you? Stay away from pod couplings! That was good.
You may even recognize some of these planets if you've been with my channel for a while, as we'll race on both Malastare.
They're pod racing on Malastare. Very fast, very dangerous.
And Uvo 4, both of which have appeared in Star Wars Bounty Hunter, and both of which we covered in my retrospective of that game. Those aside, there are some really cool maps available here. I mean, we'll see some underwater areas, some lava pit industrial areas, destroyed cities. I mean, I was quite frankly shocked at how cool some of these environments are. One of these locations went on to appear in Episode 2, showing a pod race on a hologram of the cantina Anakin and Obi-Wan chase Zam Wesell into. See that there? That's Ando Prime, and we can race various versions of that track here on Episode 1 Racer. Man, I love the connectivity of old Star Wars. Another planet we get to see is the oceanic world of Aquilaris, which fans might recognize sort of being mentioned in the novel Star Wars Knight Errant. Though the planet mentioned there was Aquilaris Minor, not the main world we see in this game. Still similar, I'm pretty sure they're the same system. My favorite track, however, is found on the planet of Ord Ibana, built around an old derelict mining colony that a scrapper named Death Row Glock retrofitted into 3 different pod racing tracks to play on. Avid readers of the Star Wars Jedi comics from 2003 may remember spotting this one in issue number 4 titled Count Dooku. That's enough lore ranting about planets, let's talk about the gameplay a little bit. The primary game mode is called Tournament, and it's what I described before, where you'll play through a series of 4 increasingly difficult circuits. It's a championship, and it's the mode you'll be spending the most time with. That being said, there are 2 other modes to talk about. That's the free race mode, and is exactly what it sounds like. You can play any level previously unlocked with any racer previously unlocked, which seems kinda useless to be honest, because you can just do that in the tournament mode as well. The only difference is that in free race mode you can set the difficulty of the enemy AI, but typically it's the tracks themselves that are hard, not really the opponents. Then lastly, you've got the time attack mode, which again is exactly what it sounds like, racing against the clock to get the best time you can. The unique thing about this mode is that it removes your opponents from the map and allows you to focus on just getting the best possible time you can on the track. Time attack is also totally absent from the PC version of the game, but that one does allow you to just remove opponents from free race mode for a somewhat similar experience. Getting into the game itself, Racer really is your standard fare racing game. Speed ahead, make 3 laps around a course, and beat your competition to the finish line. That being said, there are a few things that make it stand out. One of those being the repair mechanics. See, your pod racer can actually take some serious damage on these very dangerous tracks. So much so that seeing it outright explode is going to be a pretty common visual. With this in mind, you can actually make repairs mid-race to try and account for the damage you might be taking like we see in the film. Doing this slows your vehicle down, but if you time things right, that slight temporary slowdown can be preferable to the 3-second setback of watching your pod racer explode. You can speed your repairs up by buying pit droids from Watto, which also cost you Trugits, but are probably going to be worth the investment in the long run. Another more conventional racing game mechanic is your boost, working similar to how you might expect a nitrous boost to work in a game like Need for Speed. This becomes crucial to actually winning races in later circuits. You can use it repeatedly, but it does require both a brief 1-second charge up and a roughly 3-second cooldown. But because it can slowly overheat your engines, you have to know how long to use it, which actually means you can use it strategically for smaller boosts to close the gap between you and your competitors, or just blow nearly all of it on one big advantage gain on a straight stretch. Other than that, it's going to be a really straightforward gameplay experience. There isn't much to say on the music either, since it's pretty much all just Williams tracks ripped straight from the first movie's score, which helps it fit nice and snug as an Episode 1 tie-in. One thing I will say is music only plays when you start your 3rd and final lap. I thought this was a strange decision at first because the first 2 laps feel kinda quiet when you first start playing, but after a few levels I really got it. When the challenge starts to increase, that final lap can feel very intense, so the music kicking in right as you recognize it's make or break time helps everything to feel all more climactic. And honestly, the team did such a good job with all the sound effects for the pod racers that having those first 2 laps to really tune into the different sounds of your racer speeding through the environment or the chugging sounds of it being repaired helped make it feel more like that first part of the movie's race sequence when there's not music, just the sounds of the race. Honestly, LucasArts really nailed the feeling of flying through a course at 500 miles an hour. Star Wars Racer was met with some above-average reviews upon its release, garnering 7s, 8s, and 9s from major video game journalists at the time, and went on to become a serious cult classic both among Star Wars fans, racing game fans, and N64 fans in general. It is such a classic that it has since seen multiple re-releases and ports to modern hardware, including the PS4, Xbox One, and even the Nintendo Switch. Point is, people loved it then and still seem to love it now. Not only is it a great Star Wars game, I personally think it's an awesome racing game in its own right. Like, even if this wasn't Star Wars, all of these really creative and exciting levels, mixed with solid gameplay and ample customization, adds up to an excellent racing game, just in general. The Star Wars skin just makes it feel all the more recognizable and fun. So if you're looking for an over-the-top sci-fi racing game on the N64, you really can't go wrong with this one. One more honorable mention I want to bring up are the Lucas Learning games, most of which are in fact somewhat based on the Phantom Menace. This was a branch of LucasArts dedicated specifically to educational video games for young children to learn with. There were 9 different Lucas Learning games, all set in the Star Wars universe, but only one of them actually bore the Episode 1 moniker in its title. That being Star Wars Episode 1, The Gungan Frontier. It's kind of like an RTS builder type deal where you control the building of a new Gungan ecosystem as they attempt to colonize a Naboo moon called Oma-Dune. This is actually canon, by the way. Well, canon to the EU at least. The events of this game are brought up in an EU comic where the CIS wiped this colony out during the Clone Wars. Crazy. Each of these Lucas Learning games are kind of fun and unique enough in their own right, but they're kind of hard to get up and running these days, and because nobody seems to care about them, they've actually just become straight up abandonware. And honestly, that's kind of a shame too. Could be cool to see them all packaged up together and made runnable in a single unit on Steam or something, but I don't know how well something like that would even sell, so that's kind of just wishful thinking. Aside from the Gungan Frontier, Lucas Learning also developed 8 other educational games set in the Star Wars universe. Star Wars Droid Works, Yoda's Challenge Activity Center, Pit Droids, Anakin Speedway, Early Learning Activity Center, Star Wars Math, Jabba's Game Galaxy, Star Wars Jar Jar's Journey, and Star Wars Super Bombad Racing. I'll talk about this one more in a different video sometime later. None of these are actually really tie-in games with the Phantom Menace though. They're just fun educational games made for children with a Star Wars aesthetic. And that's a deep dive into all of the direct tie-in video games for Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. I actually ended up loving my time with most of these games and was able to find 1 or 2 redeeming qualities in pretty much all of them regardless of their quality. But that is coming from an obviously pretty big Star Wars fan, so keep that in mind. Although something I did find pretty interesting and wanted to note on was that The Phantom Menace was the only Star Wars film to go out of its way to mark so much of its expanded tie-in content with the Episode 1 subtitle. So you had a lot of video games, comics, and other content being branded as Star Wars Episode 1, insert own subtitle here. Which was kind of interesting because it makes it all feel kind of tied into one cohesive project. Like, The Phantom Menace is the core story for Episode 1, but Episode 1 actually spans out to all of these different projects, at least in terms of the title. But then you also had other content like Starfighter, which weren't branded as Star Wars Episode 1, but clearly were directly tied to it. I think it's pretty obvious that this was just a marketing tactic that they had put together to capitalize on the hype of Episode 1, but it's still kind of a unique thing to look back on. Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, would also have plenty of tie-in content of its own, but pretty much none of it used the Episode 2 moniker. Well, except for the direct adaptation game for the Game Boy Advance. Like Star Wars The Clone Wars for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube didn't call itself Star Wars Episode 2 The Clone Wars, despite being directly tied to the events of the film. And then by the time Episode 3 came around, it only had one direct adaptation, and that was pretty much it. Republic Commando and Battlefront 2 were launched around the same time, but they didn't really tie into the film at all. And pretty much all of the other Star Wars films pale in comparison to The Phantom Menace in terms of merchandising and tie-in content. The sheer number of books, video games, comics, toys, action figures, anything you could really think of that was tying itself into The Phantom Menace was the biggest that I think we've ever seen in a Star Wars film. Maybe episode 3 came close, but I'm pretty sure the Phantom Menace was as big as it ever got. Not to mention that I feel like video games were a little bit cheaper to make around the time of this film's debut, which as they got more expensive with growing technology, made it harder to crank out this many different tie-in games. But there you go, I played every tie-in game for the Phantom Menace, and I ended up liking most of them, which means it was a pretty great time for me to put together, and also let me know if you'd want me to make a similar video for Attack of the Clones. And if you enjoyed watching this video, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment of some kind, and subscribe to the channel. And if you really want to help out, consider becoming a channel member or signing up for my Patreon so you can financially provide me the support I need to keep giving coverage to these old Star Wars games. And again, thanks so much to everyone for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. But until then, that's all I got for you.